Chapter 893. Situ Xianxia stared blankly at the figure coming out of the storm. The bloody storm between heaven and earth had solidified. His pace was neither fast nor slow. As if nothing had happened. He did it as if it were light and understated. This was an indescribable casualness and indifference. She heard him call her Aunt Situ. That face was still so familiar. But in Situ Xianxia's heart, he seemed to be a completely different person. He might still be him. But in more than 2 years, whether it was spirit, mentality or martial arts, he seemed to have transformed and sublimated to another level. Tianlan, she called out subconsciously. Li Tianlan nodded and threw the soldier of Snow Country to the ground. The soldier was majestic and burly, wearing a neat military uniform. Judging from his rank, he was a general. At this time, he was lying on the ground like a dead pig, silent. Li Tianlan looked down at him and fell silent. He didn't speak. The world became dead silent in an instant. The indescribable bloody storm seemed to be slowing down. It also seemed to be accelerating. The rotation of the storm became more and more blurred, as if it was too fast or too slow, and finally became a state of complete stillness. There was only a still blood red in front of drifting cloud. The pungent smell of blood filled the air like water. The red in front of him occupied everything in sight. The snow was gone. The mountains were gone. The valley was gone. All he could see was this still red. He couldn't hear any sound, and he couldn't see the opposite barracks. In the indescribable silence, drifting cloud's chest became more and more stuffy, and he only felt that his whole body became heavier and heavier. In a trance, the still storm seemed to make the first roar. It was a very familiar sound. It was like a strong wind blowing up the snow. Snowflakes were flying in the air, like white catkins all over the sky. Drifting clouds stared at the still red in front of him. The still red began to rotate again, faster and faster, with an extremely sharp sound. The almost dark red began to fade, mixed with white, and rotated wildly. Li Tianlan still stood, silently looking down at the unconscious general of Snow Country at his feet. The faintly discernible sword chi kept vibrating around him. The bloody storm became thinner and thinner with the vibration of the sword energy. Faintly, drifting clouds saw the valleys and peaks blocked by the bloody storm. The smell of blood began to surge. The bloody storm became more and more chaotic. White snow. The red blood spread wildly in all directions. The process seemed slow, but it was also extremely fast. It seemed to only take a breath's time. The storm was gone. The red that filled the sky also disappeared. The silence turned into silence. Lu Yun subconsciously took a deep breath and looked at his surroundings. They were still standing in the same place. There was no change in the snow mountain. The valley remained unchanged. Sai City remained unchanged. Lu Yun looked at everything that was familiar to him and his eyes suddenly froze. An incomprehensible emotion arose in his eyes, and it transformed into astonishment, shock, absurdity, and finally a wisp of indescribable terror. His body stiffened on the spot, like a petrified statue. The sound of rapid and heavy breathing came out from the side of his mouth. His eyes were open to the widest, staring in the direction of the Snow Empire military camp. In his line of sight, the boundary monument was still there. The flag of Snow Country Corps on the land of Jianghu State was still there. The military camp of Snow Country was still brightly lit. Lu Yun recalled the blood-colored storm. He had thought that after the storm, he would see countless corpses, a large scene of suffering, and Li Tianlan's current strength. But no, there was nothing. He didn't see the corpses or the wounded. It was quiet on Mount Tai Bai. Everything in sight was white snow. No corpses, no wounded, no army. No army. No army. The military camp of Snow Country was still there. But in that quiet storm, all the creatures in the Snow Empire's military camp had completely disappeared. It was as if they had never existed. Lu Yun opened his mouth, like a dying fish. All this was beyond his imagination. Even if he was a superior a half-step to invincible realm. A subtle sound rang in the valley. In an instant, the sword energy that seemed to cover the world began to gather toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan, who had been quiet, moved and breathed out softly. Situ Xianxia took a deep look at Li Tianlan. Compared with Lu Yun, she naturally knew the power of that sword move better. That was really tearing everything apart. At that moment, The area covered by the storm became the domain of sword energy. Pure sword energy. Countless strands of sword chi surged within the domain. Every strand of sword chi collided with other strands of sword chi countless times. The sword chi shattered into even smaller strands of sword chi. The vast sword energy completely tore the corpses of the soldiers of Snow Country, leaving no trace of their existence. No, there might still be traces, but all the blood had been covered by snow. There were 2 legions and several elites of Snow Country from the Special Warfare Agency. This kind of sword energy. As far as Situ Tsongyue knew, there seemed to be only one person who could do it. Wang Tianzong. It was Wang Tianzong before Eastern Europe. This was the power that faintly surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. But she was an invincible realm superior and could roughly feel Li Tianlan's state. Whether it was his age or his actual performance, he didn't seem to have really entered the invincible realm. So how did he do it? Situ Tsongyue quietly looked at Li Tianlan, who was motionless. She was a little relieved, but also inexplicably upset. Your Highness, this. Lu Yun finally came back to his senses and stammered. Why are you here? Situ Tsongyue smiled and said, It's not urgent here. No, it's urgent. Li Tianlan shook his head. He slowly moved his arm. Crack. In an instant, the sound of countless joints vibrating came out of Li Tianlan's body. His face turned pale for a moment. In Lu Yun's sight, he clearly saw a shocking bloodstain on Li Tianlan's arm. Li Tianlan's skin suddenly began to break at some point, spreading to his 5 fingers, palms, back of hands, wrists, and even to the invisible place in his sleeves. One of his arms was like broken glass, densely packed and full of cracks for a while. Situ Tsongyue's eyes suddenly froze. Li Tianlan looked at his arm expressionlessly. This was the hand that held the sword. His cracked palm slowly clenched into a fist. Fresh blood flowed down his chest and palms, falling onto the snowy ground. It was a ghastly sight. I'm fine, he said in a low voice. Situ Tsongyue did not speak. She stared at his palm, and her eyes trembled slightly. The blood dripping quickly became less and less. There seemed to be a dense mist in Li Tianlan's palm. Large patches of blood and dense cracks began to become blurred in the mist. Li Tianlan's body slowly relaxed and kicked the general of Snow Country under his feet. The general groaned and opened his eyes blankly. His memory was still stuck just now. He was just ordering the artillery of the barracks to fire again when he was suddenly pulled by a hand. When he woke up, he was here. Where was this place? The general was slightly shocked and suddenly got up. He saw Li Tianlan, Situ Tsongyue, and Drifting Cloud, as well as his empty and silent barracks. Where's my army? He said subconsciously and finally realized where he was. It didn't matter where he was. What mattered was who was beside him. The general's face was pale and he took a step forward subconsciously. A subtle sound was heard accompanied by screams. Countless densely packed sword chi enveloped everything around the general. He took a step forward and his body directly hit a large piece of sword energy. The sword energy went deep into his body. In an instant, his military uniform was directly dyed red with blood. The general howled wildly, and his eyes were filled with pain and fear. Name. Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at him condescendingly. Takov. No. The general answered in a trembling voice. Countless sword energy went deep into his body and did not seem to disappear at all. Instead, they were destroying his flesh and blood bit by bit as if they were alive. The unprepared encounter almost crushed his will at once. It's too long, I can't remember. Li Tianlan said lightly, just call him Tatev. It's Takov. The general groaned in his heart, but his Chinese was a little bad, and he was not in the mood to explain anything. His body curled up and kept trembling under the pain. Your army has crossed the boundary. Li Tianlan looked at him and said quietly. Yes. General Takov shouted. He wanted to raise his voice, but his words were extremely weak. I'm willing to apologize, on behalf of my army. Who do you think you are? Li Tianlan looked at him silently. Your apology is worthless. He reached out and grabbed Takov's bloody body, pointing to the flag of Snow Country that was still stuck in the snow of Jianghu State. Did you see it? Li Tianlan asked. Yes. Takov nodded frantically. His legs gradually became wet, and a suspicious liquid flowed down his trousers. Now contact your boss. Li Tianlan's voice was low and gloomy. Before dark, there must be a person who can represent Snow Country. The president, the prime minister, your defense general, anyone. Ask him to come here, pull out your flag from the land of Jianghu state, and make a public apology. Otherwise, within half a month, I will personally put the star flag of Jianghu state in front of the gate of your capital. He paused and looked at Tokov. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. Tokov kept nodding. Li Tianlan casually threw him to the ground and said calmly, I'm here waiting for your country's apology. Drifting Cloud's body trembled, and he did not dare to speak for a while. Situ Tsongyue took a deep breath and suddenly laughed. At this moment, she seemed to have made up her mind. Chapter 894. General Tarkov, whose full name was unknown, tremblingly took out his mobile phone. It was obvious that the general of Snow Country stationed at the border was frightened, and his voice trembled when he called his superior. Li Tianlan didn't understand Russian, and didn't bother to listen to what he was talking about on the phone. He just reached out and touched the hilt of the startling sword, as if saying hello. The startling sword trembled slightly, and the hilt rubbed against Li Tianlan's palm. It looked very happy. It's hard for the representatives of Snow Country to come before dark. Situ Tsongyue looked at Li Tianlan and said softly. To some extent, Snow Country's bureaucracy in some aspects could be said to be the most serious in the world. The story of destroying 2 legions in a storm outside Sai City was indeed shocking enough. But Snow Country, as one of the toughest nations in the world, could hardly be completely subdued because of this. They might compromise, but Li Tianlan didn't leave any room for compromise. Li Tianlan's requirement was that before dark, the president, prime minister, or the defense general of Snow Country should apologize in person, walk to the border of Jianghu state, and take their flag back. Even if the high-level individuals would be frightened by Li Tianlan, the army of Snow Country couldn't bear this kind of humiliation. It was equivalent to an outsider asking Jianghu state to make Li Huaqing, Chen Fangqing, or Dongqing Wudi apologize and pull out the flag planted by their own soldiers. This was a great humiliation. So in Situ Tsongyue's view, not only before dark, the 3 giants of Snow Country might not come back at all. Even more exaggeratedly, the news wouldn't reach the ears of the 3 giants in a short time. I know. Li Tianlan said quietly. Situ Tsongyue answered with some doubts. So I gave them half a month. Li Tianlan said slowly, even if I have shown enough strength, it's easy for them to focus on other places. The chaos in Beihai is close at hand. It's normal that the military camp of Snow Country doesn't retreat and the high-level officials of Snow Country don't come, because they are waiting for the end of Beihai. And the state of your sword? Situ Tsongyue said calmly. He destroyed 2 legions with 1 sword strike. Even if it was an army formed by 2 groups of people, such destructive power was enough to make people feel like their guts were being torn apart. But in comparison, this sword was still inferior to the sword light that could reach tens of thousands of meters in an instant in the desert. The theory that Li Tianlan's strength was based on murderous weapons was very popular in the dark world. So even without the 2 legions, Snow Country would still attribute this to the power of Xianyuan Feng. And in the chaotic battle in North Sea, Xianyuan Feng's energy would inevitably be consumed quickly, or even completely exhausted. Without energy, Xianyuan Feng was just an invincible godly weapon. Naturally, Li Tianlan's state was flawed. I don't care about that. Li Tianlan shook his head. Your Highness, you just said that you will wait here for the higher-ups of Snow Empire. Lu Yun tried his best to calm down. His smile was a little stiff, and his voice was a little cautious. Yes, Li Tianlan said, that way, I can ask for more compensation from them in half a month. Because I waited for them for the whole afternoon. Situ Tsongyue looked at Li Tianlan in a daze. After a long while, she suddenly reached out and touched his head. Li Tianlan laughed. He might not be handsome, but his young and clean face was confident and warm when he smiled, like the sunshine in the flying snow. He silently looked at the empty and silent camp of Snow Country, and was silent for a while. Everything that happened here today would not be meaningless. All the losses of Snow Country would be counted on Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xiaoyao now controlled the dark world of Snow Country, but he only cooperated with the higher-ups of Snow Country. Perhaps he occupied a dominant position, but he was far from being able to do whatever he wanted. Half a month. Li Tianlan was going to use this half a month to end everything at present. Half a month later, he would let the whole dark world have his voice. He gently tapped on the hilt of graceful sword and found that the general of Snow Country had hung up the phone and looked at him with a little nervous eyes. As a general of Snow Country, he obviously knew the situation of his country better than anyone else. So he collapsed on the snow with blood all over his body, and there was some despair in his eyes. The result? Li Tianlan said casually. Tokov tried his best to smile. His smile was uglier than crying. He was promoted to the military rank last year and was not from Jianghu state. He didn't know Li Tianlan and didn't know how to call him, so he could only skip this step and said directly, No, my boss. My boss said he would report this to the president. His voice was a little trembling. But, no buts. Li Tianlan shook his head. You can kneel here before the people of Snow Country come. Countless visible sword energy intertwined in front of him and spread upward quickly. Tokov's face was pale, and he subconsciously propped up his upper body. The sword energy went straight from his chest to the top of his head. He remained kneeling and was completely shrouded by the sword energy. In this case, as long as his body moved more than 5 centimeters, his whole body would be cut into countless pieces by the sword energy. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and looked at Sai City behind him. Auntie, let's go back and talk. His voice was a little deep. Okay. Situ Songyue nodded. Have you had lunch? I'll have someone prepare it. He gave Lu Yun a wink. Lu Yun nodded and quickly turned to arrange lunch. Not yet. I heard that the snow chicken here is good. I'll try it later. Li Tianlan said with a smile. Situ Songyue gently raised the corner of her mouth. Her eyebrows and eyes were curved like crescent moons, and the thin crow's feet showed at the corners of her eyes. She was extremely beautiful and kind. It's a little late. I'll cook for you next time. Okay. Li Tianlan smiled but did not move. Situ Songyue finally realized something. Her expression was a little dignified. Now you. I'm fine. Li Tianlan said softly. He stood where he was and moved his body slightly. The range of that kind of movement was too small, even smaller than a slight tremble. It seemed that he had been standing where he was. Situ Songyue's eyes were a little worried. She suddenly said, I'll carry you on my back. No need. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and suddenly took a step forward. Sizzle. In the slight sound, it seemed that something was breaking, and the liquid was squeezed out. Li Tianlan, who was expressionless, suddenly frowned. A lot of blood came out from his body in an instant. Li Tianlan's face grew paler. Blood soaked his whole body in an instant. Under the cover of the black windbreaker, Situ Songyue could only see a small part of his trousers stained with blood and his chest that was not covered by the windbreaker. Ha! Li Tianlan raised the corner of his mouth, and the short syllable became a little distorted. Situ Songyue tightly pursed her lips. After a while she said hoarsely, Your body is too fragile. This is the price of invincibility. Li Tianlan whispered. It seemed that because of the pain, his voice was a little gloomy. But it's not unbearable. He slowly stepped forward. The blood became more and more as he moved. Li Tianlan left a very obvious bloodstain on the road he walked. And for me, such a price is not unbearable. There was no way for him to enter the invincible realm at this age. He could only take another path. Unorthodox way? Unorthodox way? Whatever it was. He was now indeed standing at the peak of personal force in the dark world. He would pay a little price. But he had the dragon vein, and his body's amazing recovery ability was enough to suppress this price to a bearable range. For Li Tianlan, as long as he could bear it, there was no price. He walked faster and faster. Wisps of dense mist gradually spread from his arms to his whole body. He walked in the snow all over the mountain, and his body became more and more blurred. At nearly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the wounds on Li Tianlan's body had completely healed. His aura was still a little weak, but it was recovering every moment. He took a shower in the room used for entertaining guests and changed his clothes. A sumptuous lunch had been prepared in the small restaurant of Sai City. The high-level officials of Sai City gathered together and waited quietly for Li Tianlan. Situ Songyue introduced everyone to Li Tianlan very seriously. Cool breeze, drifting cloud, and deep dream could all be said to be acquaintances. In addition, there were 4 experts above the thunder-shocking realm in Sai City. Wuxia, a petite and silent assassin at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Wildfire, an assassin at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm who was born in Azura Path, but took the initiative to join Sai City. Wukong was the oldest and the first to follow Situ Tsongyue. Nowadays, he seldom went down the mountain and played the role of the butler of Sai City. The other one was not present, but Li Tianlan was most familiar with her. She was Du Hanin, who was a latecomer among the several veteran assassins of Sai City. There was also a thunder-shocking realm assassin who died in Europe more than a year ago. Now, in front of Li Tianlan was the top lineup of Sai City. Of course, Li Tianlan still remembered another name of Sai City. That was also the purpose of his coming here today. Li Tianlan shook hands with everyone and then sat in the main seat that Situ Tsongyue intentionally or unintentionally left for him. He didn't say much and just began to eat quietly. There was no wine on the table, and no one who was good at talking, so the atmosphere was a little dull, but not solemn. Li Tianlan didn't put down his bowl and chopsticks until everyone slowed down. He looked at the crowd and said slowly, "In a short time, Snow Country won't come to apologize, but they won't continue to send troops here." No one spoke and looked at Li Tianlan attentively. Li Tianlan gently knocked on the table and said in a low and soft tone, "I have one thing that I need your help with." "Go ahead." Situ Tsongyue smiled softly. "I have no problem with going to Beihai with your highness. I believe everyone here will." Cool Breeze said with a smile, including Wukong the old guy. Wukong, whose hair was a little gray, smiled. He looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, "I can still move my old bones. If your highness needs me, just say the word. I also miss the days when I fought side by side with your highness." Deep Dream laughed and seemed to recall the time in East Island. "I have no problem." Radiant Moon and Wildfire spoke at the same time. "Not to Beihai. I can solve the problem in Beihai by myself." Li Tianlan took a deep look at them and said quietly. Situ Tsongyue raised her eyebrows and said nothing. Li Tianlan lowered his eyelids, knocked on the table and said slowly, "I hope Sai City can go to East Island." His voice was as soft as the wind. But in Situ Tsongyue's ears, it was like a clap of thunder. Her smile froze for a moment, and it seemed a little unnatural. All the people present were top assassins. They almost instantly caught the change in Situ Tsongyue's expression. The dining table became quiet. Li Tianlan calmly took a sip of tea and said nothing. It was certain that East Island's Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace would participate in the final battle in Beihai. Not only the 2 major martial arts sects of East Island, but also Beihai, to be exact, the southern area of Beihai province. East Island was determined to get it this time. In their eyes, that was their land. So all the intelligence showed that in the special warfare system of East Island, personnel were transferred frequently, and it was clear that they intended to go all out to destroy the Wang family of Beihai. Under such circumstances, East Island was bound to be empty again. Just like in the final battle in Heaven Capital 5 years ago. The old things seemed to be reincarnated again. It was the same situation. 5 years ago, a considerable number of experts from East Island were trapped in Jianghu State, including 2 invincible realm grandmasters from East Island. And this time, 2 invincible realm grandmasters of East Island were about to be involved in Beihai. The only difference was that Li Tianlan was not qualified to fight for anything 5 years ago. But now, 5 years later, he wanted the right to speak in the dark world of East Island. Li Tianlan was qualified to fight for anything, and any resources. Emperor Dong's palace was rooted in Tiannan and would gradually spread to the entire Southeast Asia. Although East Island was small, it was enough to be a barrier for Emperor Dong's palace in some aspects. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe were the foundation laid by Li Tianlan. The military flag movement gave Li Tianlan a reason to intervene in Snow Country. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe gradually established contact with the Dark Knights in Northern Europe. The treason conspiracy of the Special Warfare Group could also allow Li Tianlan to gradually replace Kunlun City. Jianghu State, Southeast Asia, East Island, Eastern Europe, Northern Europe. Li Tianlan could fight for everything. As long as he had enough time to digest all these, Emperor Dong's palace would become the real overlord of the Dark World. This was the era of Dong Huang. There might be obstacles in front of Li Tianlan, but after Momon's eternal sword, there was no insurmountable mountain in front of him. Everything he wanted was no longer a future that he could look forward to. But now was the time. If he wanted it, he would get it. East Island was determined to get Beihai. Li Tianlan was determined to get East Island. It was a race against time. So he wanted to go to Sai City. Not only Sai City. Mount Shu, which could not intervene in the final battle of Beihai, would also go there. Situ Tsongyue. Wei Kunlun. He wanted the only two invincible realm experts in Jianghu state to completely overturn East Island. Li Tianlan picked up the cup in front of him and drank some water. He turned his head and looked at Situ Tsongyue quietly. Situ Tsongyue said nothing. She looked at Li Tianlan with a pale face. Li Tianlan looked away. His expression grew calmer. Chapter 895. The atmosphere seemed to have dropped to a freezing point. Everyone could feel the stalemate at the dining table. Li Tianlan held the cup and tapped it thoughtfully. His expression was as calm as water and he said nothing. Situ Tsongyue slightly lowered her head and also said nothing. Cool breeze and drifting clouds seemed somewhat nervous. They sat there motionlessly, not making any unnecessary movements. Deep Dream wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, she did not speak. Sai City was definitely willing to accept Li Tianlan's order, and the interior of East Island would become empty as the final battle of Beihai progressed. Sai City, Mount Shu. In today's dark world, in terms of high-end force, the combination of the two forces would not be weaker than any superpower in its heyday. The hidden god of Jianghu state, the Nirvana Swordmaster. Two invincible realm experts. Qing Feng, Lu Yun, Phantom Swordmaster, Yin Yang Swordmaster. 4 half-step invincible realm experts. This kind of lineup was exaggerated enough at any time, and it had the ability to overturn the whole East Island to meet Li Tianlan's requirements. But the problem was that Situ Tsongyue didn't want to go to East Island. Not because of East Island itself. It was not because of Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace. It was because of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Although its strength had been shifting in the past 2 years, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital still had a lot of influence in East Island. Because of Li Kuangtu of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Or perhaps there were others. The atmosphere was getting more and more oppressive. Qing Feng forced a smile and opened his mouth. He wanted to say something. Li Tianlan glanced at him. His eyes were calm, and could even be said to be clear. However, Qing Feng suddenly lost the courage to speak and lowered his head in silence. He understood Li Tianlan's eyes. So calm, so determined. All he wanted was an answer. There was no need for a reason. To East Island. Situ Tsongyue finally spoke. Her face was a little pale, and her smile was a little forced, but her voice was still gentle. How far do you want to go? Li Tianlan tapped the glass in his hand with his fingers. Quiet and indifferent. Those who obey me shall prosper. Those who oppose me shall perish. With a calm voice, he gave his answer. An answer that left no room for discussion. Situ Tsongyue's body shook slightly and she said in a low voice, including, nothing. Li Tianlan interrupted her and said softly, I just want what I want, that's all. That was all. Nothing was included, which meant that everything was included. What he wanted was East Island. So everything in East Island was no different to Li Tianlan. Wuji Palace, Jifeng Sword Training School, Purgatory of Heaven Capital. All the dark forces. Those who obey me will prosper. Those who oppose me will perish. Situ Tsongyue suddenly stood up. She glanced at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan looked up at her, his eyes clear and soft. Come with me. Situ Tsongyue suddenly said and walked out of the restaurant. She walked quietly in front, down the stairs, and out the door. In front of him was still the same unchanging snowstorm, vast and boundless. Situ Tsongyue walked quietly. She was in a trance. Li Tianlan followed her, silent and indifferent. The wind and snow fluttered the black cloak he was wearing, and the long hem of the cloak floated gently in the wind and snow. The complicated and dense golden patterns on the cloak formed mysterious patterns one after another in the transformation of the cloak. Li Tianlan stood straight, exuding an extremely sharp majesty. What if I refuse? Situ Tsongyue suddenly whispered. Li Tianlan didn't seem surprised. He just nodded and said, I can understand. What if I refuse? Situ Tsongyue asked again in a faint tone. Then Mount Shu will go by itself, and Saint will lead the team. Li Tianlan said. Situ Tsongyue smiled and kept walking. She repeated again. What if I refuse? Li Tianlan was silent for a while, chuckled, and repeated his first answer. I can understand. He said. Those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will perish? Situ Tsongyue laughed. How could it be? Li Tianlan couldn't help laughing. I respect your choice. If Sai City refuses, I will go down the mountain. No one will perish. Sai City will always be a friend of Emperor Dong's palace. You are not included. He couldn't forget what Sai City had done for him, so he really understood. He didn't mind Situ Tsongyue refusing his request, but he would regret it. If he left Sai City today and returned without accomplishing anything, then it seemed that Sai City was destined to go on a completely different path from Emperor Dong's palace. They are not included. Situ Tsongyue's voice was low. Li Tianlan looked at Situ Tsongyue with a smile and said softly, Really? Isn't it? Situ Tsongyue looked at Li Tianlan with sharp eyes. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and said lightly, I haven't thought about this, and it's not what I should think about. Before my grandfather died, he handed the Li family to me. Different people may have different answers, but in my eyes, the Li family is my Li family, and I don't accept betrayal. That's not betrayal. Situ Tsongyue's voice was a little excited. That's your answer. Li Tianlan said softly, In my eyes, it's betrayal. Including Li Kuang-tu. Including the old man standing next to Li Kuang-tu. Many people. Betrayal. In Li Tianlan's eyes, they were betrayers. In their eyes, Li Tianlan might also be a betrayal. They were the same. I can accept different ideas. Just like Sai City now. Auntie, I won't blame you whether you help me or not, but I won't accept betrayal. He looked at Situ Tsongyue and whispered, I'm here to confirm one thing. Situ Tsongyue bit her lip and did not speak. Li Tianlan's voice became somewhat cold. The Heavenly Parish Palace. Whose Heavenly Parish Palace is it? Many years ago, after the collapse of the Li family, Li Honghe gave up everything on the surface. It had gathered most of the Li family's power and allowed the Li family to complete nirvana after a long period of dormancy. Countless elders of the Li family left the cage of the Li family, left Jianghu state, and formed a new organization. That was the prototype of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. In other words, it was the new Li family. It was the Purgatory of Heaven capital that Li Honghe planned to leave to Li Tianlan, and the brand new Li family that Li Tianlan planned to leave to Li Tianlan. Sunluo Hall, Long Life Hall, and Athanasi Hall became the main combat forces of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. They were also the powerful armed forces of the Purgatory of Heaven capital to deter all forces. But this was not the complete Purgatory of Heaven capital. The complete Purgatory of Heaven capital had 5 departments. Limitless, Longevity, Undying, Heaven's Net, Heaven's Fall. Tianluo was in charge of intelligence. Meteorite was a knife hidden in the dark. A killing knife. This saber also had another name. Sai City of Jianghu State. Sai City had always been the most important department of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Li family. Li Tianlan thought that the Li family was his own. But Heavenly Fall. Was it his Heavenly Fall or Li Kuang-tu's Heavenly Fall? In the wind and snow, Situ Tsongyue's face became paler. Li Tianlan's question left her with no room to avoid it. Sai City could be a pure Sai City. It could be Li Tianlan's heavenly meteor. Li Tianlan wouldn't mind. But if she chose Li Kuang-tu, she would be the enemy of Emperor Dong's palace. She didn't want to be Li Tianlan's enemy or leave the Li family, so she had to go to East Island. Overturn everything in East Island with the attitude of, those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will perish. He overturned Wuji Palace, Jifeng Sword Training School, and everything in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Break everything that belonged to the Purgatory of Heaven capital and turn it into something that belonged to Li Tianlan. This was tantamount to becoming enemies with Li Kuang-tu. Li Kuang-tu was her man. I used to be. But he was also the only man she had intimate contact with in her life. You will kill him. Situ Tsongyue lowered her eyebrows and whispered. Li Tianlan knew who she was referring to. After a long silence, he thought of Li Honghe. Shaking his head slightly, he whispered, "Probably not." He said probably. Situ Tsongyue also thought of Li Honghe. Perhaps until now, Li Guangtu didn't understand that her meeting with him was not an accident. It came from an old man's arrangement. The very first arrangement. Situ Tsongyue laughed. Her vision was a little blurry. She lowered her head slightly and whispered, "Sai City will go to East Island." After a pause, she gave the clearest answer, "Heavenly Meteor Palace will go to East Island." Li Tianlan looked at her silently. His eyes were no longer looking at an elder, but looking at an important part of his power map soberly and rationally. He would give her the greatest trust, and also give her the most solemn promise. Li Tianlan nodded. His voice shook the wind and snow. "There is a place for you in my dynasty." "Yes." Situ Tsongyue lowered her head. Her voice was sad and a little dazed, but it was extremely clear. "Your Majesty." Chapter 896. When she opened her eyes, the room was gloomy and gloomy. The clock on the wall was ticking. She moved and looked at the time. For a moment, she couldn't tell whether it was day or night. The curtains were closed, there was no sunlight outside, and it was quiet around. Bai Yuming sat up, put on her slippers, opened the curtains, and saw the vast snow outside. It seemed to be afternoon. It was going to be dark. She shook her head with difficulty and subconsciously touched the wounds on her body. The feeling of weakness was still there, and her whole body was soft. Her ears seemed to be still echoing the raging artillery fire. All kinds of weapons shone in different colors and roared unscrupulously in the desert under the night sky. The earth-shattering sound seemed to have been imprinted in the depths of her heart. It was the explosion, the blood, and the flying yellow sand. Bai Yuming stood by the window and looked out. The surroundings were quiet and warm. Outside the window was flying snowflakes. Yesterday, today. What she thought and what she saw seemed to be two completely different worlds. She stood on the edge of the world, and her whole person had a sense of being torn apart. Her spirit was not tense, but she still did not completely relax. Chaotic memories kept rolling. She remembered that she helped Li Tianlan clean up the bodies of the dead in the desert. She remembered that she flew to Suzhou with the helicopter from Suzhou. She did not return to Tiannan in Suzhou, but returned to Yuzhou. Home. Bai Yuming was at a loss for a long time before she realized that she was at home, in her room. No matter what the outcome of last night's war was, it was over. She touched the wounds on her body. Countless wounds, big and small, had healed and formed scabs. The Dongqing clan and the Bai family naturally had a way to remove scars. Her injury was not too serious, and there was no serious problem on the surface of her body. The internal injury still needed to rest for a period of time. The main thing was the weakness brought by mental exhaustion and severe exhaustion, which made her weak. There was also the sequela brought by the Taoist madness. The Taoist madness. She thought of Azura Path. She thought of her commander. Her knife pierced into his chest. They said goodbye. Said goodbye. Bai Yuming was silent for a long time. It was hard for her to describe her psychological feelings. It was a little low, but not heart-wrenching. She was muddle-headed. That knife seemed to have merged with every picture of the Desert War. Perhaps it was a little special, but they were indeed fused together. Bai Yuming grabbed her hair. She had liked him before. In the past. She shook her head again and drank the recovery potion on the bedside table. She changed out of her pajamas and put on some loose clothes before walking out of her room. A burst of hearty laughter came from downstairs. It sounded familiar. Bai Yuming stood on the railing of the corridor and looked down, slightly stunned. On the sofa in the living room downstairs, a man in his 30s was watching. The calm and composed man sat there, talking happily with his grandfather Bai Zhanfeng. Although he was a junior, he showed no fear and trepidation in the face of the most senior counselor in Zhongzhou State. His every move was free and easy, and his momentum was magnificent. Bai Zhanfeng sat opposite him with a smile. His face was ruddy and he seemed to be in a good mood. Bai Yuming blinked her eyes and forced herself to wake up from her muddle-headed state. She adjusted her mood and chuckled. "Brother-in-law, long time no see. What a rare guest. I thought the speaker had forgotten where the Bai family is." Bai Zhanfeng raised his head and glanced at his granddaughter, smiling without saying a word. Opposite him, Zhou Yuanshan, who was now the speaker of Xianxia, raised his head and glared at Bai Yuming. He scolded with a smile. "How dare you call me brother-in-law? Every time you open your mouth, you call me brother-in-law. I think you've forgotten about me, your brother. I am 1 year older than Chochi. Chochi has always called me sister. It's right to call you brother-in-law." Bai Yuming raised the corner of her mouth and sped up her pace to go downstairs. Zhou Yuanshan shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. In this generation of the 3 pillars of the giant group, he, Bai Yuming, and Dongqing Chochi were close in age. They could be said to be childhood friends. He was 4 years older than Dongqing Chochi, and Bai Yuming was 1 year older than Dongqing Chochi. In this way, Bai Yuming, who called Zhou Yuanshan brother since childhood, always regarded herself as sister after they got married. When they got married, if Zhou Yuanshan didn't call her sister, he almost couldn't get into the bridal chamber. It was a dark history with no moral integrity. Now, every time he met Bai Yuming, she called him brother-in-law, which made his scalp numb. Bai Yuming went downstairs and poured herself a glass of water. She sat on the sofa casually and looked at Zhou Yuanshan. "Are you here for a meeting?" 3 months at the political college. Zhou Yuanshan smiled. It was an exception for him to serve as the speaker of Jianghu. Letting Dongqing Chochi serve as the governor of Jianghu was the first in history. The speaker and the governor of a province were husband and wife. This was not only unprecedented, but also unprecedented. Dongqing Chochi received the admission notice from the political college soon after she took office. Now she had just returned to Jianghu. With the gradual improvement of the situation, especially the stability of Jianghu, Zhou Yuanshan naturally couldn't avoid this process. Political college, Tut. Advanced course? Is the speaker going to become a member of parliament? Bai Yuming smiled. Zhou Yuanshan picked up a pillow and threw it at her. Bai Yuming took the pillow and held it in her arms. "You are more optimistic than me." Zhou Yuanshan shook his head. Training course. The study in the political college was generally divided into advanced course and training course. Entering the advanced course basically meant that the officials were going to be promoted or had been promoted, and the latter meant to recharge. Of course, in some special periods, there would be other good or bad interpretations. Zhou Yuanshan's qualifications were indeed shallow when compared with the position of governor, especially the speaker. The training course at the level of governor was barely gilded. "Oh," Bai Yuming answered, holding the pillow and saying nothing. She forced herself to behave normally, but she was extremely tired both mentally and mentally. Sitting on the sofa, her eyes were a little dull. She found that she hadn't slept enough. "Didn't have a good rest?" Bai Zhanfeng glanced at her and asked with a smile. "It's mainly because I'm not used to it." Bai Yuming shook her head silently. "From the battlefield to home, I still need to take a rest." "Is the injury serious?" Zhou Yuanshan asked. "The injury is not serious, but I feel very tired." Bai Yuming shook her head. "Tired." Bai Zhanfeng and Zhou Yuanshan fell silent at the same time. More than 1,000 victims in Emperor Dong's palace. And Yang Shaoxiong, who died in the hands of Bai Yuming. These were all reasons that made Bai Yuming feel tired. Zhou Yuanshan thought for a moment and smiled reluctantly. "Chochi should be on the plane now. I arranged for the secretary to pick her up. After dinner, let her talk with you. Maybe you will feel better." Bai Yuming blinked her eyes, showed a smile, and said yes. She and Dongqing Chochi hadn't seen each other for a while. Bai Zhanfeng frowned. "If you really feel tired, take a break for a while," he said softly. "Don't go to Tiannan during this time. Stay at home with me." "Well, Tianlan will come in the evening. You tell him." "Tianlan is coming?" Bai Yuming was a little surprised. "Family dinner. Everyone will come. Your grandpa Dongqing will also come." Bai Zhanfeng chuckled. What happened? Looking at her grandpa's glowing face, Bai Yuming was a little expectant. "Good news." Bai Zhanfeng couldn't hide his smile. "It's all good news." The door of the villa was pushed open. A graceful and beautiful figure walked into the villa. Before seeing Bai Zhanfeng, she had already laughed cheerfully. "Dad, I'm back." She took off her coat and walked into the living room. Zhou Yuanshan had already stood up at the first time and called her mom. Bai Qingqian smiled and waved her hand to let Zhou Yuanshan sit down. She sat next to Bai Yuming, reached out to touch her head, and asked softly, "How was your injury?" Bai Yuming held a pillow, slowly leaned against Bai Qingqian's arms, and shook her head. Bai Qingqian quietly held her niece and didn't speak for a while. "What do you want to eat tonight?" "It's time to prepare dinner," Bai Zhanfeng asked. Bai Qingqian smiled. At this moment, her whole body seemed to be shining with a kind of soft brilliance. "I just talked to Tianlan on the phone. It's snowing, and he wants to eat hot pot." Bai Zhanfeng smiled and nodded. "Yes, it's warm." Bai Qingqian nodded. "Tianlan said he had something to discuss with me." "What is it?" Bai Zhanfeng was a little stunned. "I don't know." Bai Qingqian smiled softly. "But no matter what it is," her voice paused for a moment before she continued, "I agree." Chapter 897. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon. In Yuzhou, in front of a luxury jewelry counter in the Oriental Mall, Qin Weibai gently turned her white and soft wrist. Looking at the green jade bracelet on her wrist, she chuckled and said, "Does it look good?" "It's very beautiful, Maram. This jade rabbit matches your temperament perfectly. It suits you very well. I have to say, your taste," the professionally trained shopping guide praised sincerely. But before she finished speaking, Qin Weibai interrupted her with a smile. "This is a gift I prepared for the elders." The shopping guide's smile stiffened and she wanted to smooth things over awkwardly. Qin Weibai had already turned to look at Horsewoman beside her. "What do you think?" "Boss, we have more than 25% of the Posey family shares." Horsewoman helped Qin Weibai hold her coat with one hand and a small gift bag in the other. Her expression was meticulous. The Posey family was a famous family in Europe. To be exact, they were the first jeweler in Europe. If Qin Weibai needed jewelry, she could ask them to customize it. "It's too late to prepare." Qin Weibai shook her head, took off the bracelet on her hand, and whispered with a smile, "It's just a token of my appreciation for our first formal meeting. You don't need to be too deliberate." She nodded to the shopping guide. "Wrap it up." Horsewoman immediately handed a bank card without a password to the shopping guide. The exquisite bag in her hand had already been filled with many small gifts. They were indeed small gifts. At least they were not big. For example, there were scarves, watches, jewelry, and about a dozen pieces scattered around. They were the trophies they had obtained during the afternoon shopping. The shopping guide took the bank card with both hands and trotted to pay the bill. Qin Weibai looked down at the jewelry in the counter casually. She blinked her eyes, thinking about what she seemed to have overlooked. Horsewoman held the gift and looked at the relaxed and quiet boss. She could not help but have a strange feeling in her heart. In her impression, this was not the style of the boss at all. She wore a white close-fitting cardigan, black tight straight pants, and high heels. The light-colored coat had been handed over to Horsewoman. Her always simple and light dressing style fully displayed her tall and slender figure. Qin Weibai's figure was not an exaggerated S-shape, but a kind of softness and delicacy that made people feel very comfortable at first sight. The more comfortable it was, the more it became. For some unknown reason, she wore a mask when she went out, covering half of her face. However, her cold and elegant temperament and dreamy bright eyes still attracted countless stunned gazes. Languid, leisurely, gentle, elegant, with a hint of reserved arrogance. She looked carefree and charming. This was a standard state similar to that of a rich lady. But it was not the state that the knight remembered. In her mind, her boss was like a statue of a god. She stood tall, strict, sharp, intelligent, and cold. She never seemed to be in a leisurely state, nor was there the slightest bit of laziness. She always kept herself in the calmest state of mind, thinking about everything and observing everything. She was like a statue of a god that could not be desecrated, but also like a god that could control everything. Perhaps she would become something else. But it was really hard for the knight to imagine that she would become a young housewife. The knight lowered his head and remained silent. Her eyes, which had always been arrogant and aggressive, suddenly dimmed. "What are you thinking about?" An emotionless voice suddenly rang out. Knight was shocked and shook her head subconsciously. Her voice was slightly hoarse. "No, nothing." Qin Weibai stared at her eyes and did not speak. The state that made the night very familiar seemed to be recovering in Qin Weibai, but it did not make her feel intimate. Knight subconsciously averted his gaze. You feel uncomfortable. Qin Weibai sat on the high chair and casually looked at the jewelry in the window. Her tone was very sure. Knight bit her lip and did not speak. At that moment, she did feel uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Speak. Qin Weibai said. I want to go back to Switzerland. Knight hesitated and said in a low voice. Qin Weibai was silent. She thought for a moment and said lightly, You are very dissatisfied with me. Knight hesitated and shook his head. He tried to choose his words, trying not to say some words that might irritate Qin Weibai. He said softly, I just feel that the current situation is not easy to come by. Such a situation is not for us to enjoy life. We can do more. Everything the palace master did was to make Emperor Dong's palace really rise. Now the rising state of Emperor Dong's palace was unstoppable. 2 years. After a period of silence, Li Tianlan had a real invincible momentum. What happened in Sai City today had spread throughout the dark world in the shortest time. Li Tianlan might have his own plan, but his actions were regarded as a show of force by countless people. Such a show of force was naturally extremely powerful, enough to deter most people in the dark world, and even affect the alliance of the major forces against Beihai. Hao Yue group had an accident, and there were faint cracks in the Prince group. The suspected treason of the leader of the Special Warfare Group was brewing little by little. The storm was treacherous, and the undercurrent was surging. Almost all the situations were favorable to Emperor Dong's palace. In Knight's view, everything around was full of opportunities. No matter what she did, Qin Weibai should not be in such a state. I have done what I should do. Qin Weibai was silent for a moment and shook her head. In the current situation, it is best to do nothing for the next period of time. During this period of time, Knight asked in a low voice. After military counselor's operation has a clear result. Qin Weibai said faintly, You have too many questions. Knight was silent and finally stopped talking. Go get the car. Qin Weibai said, Tianlan has come back. Let's pick him up and then go to the Bai family's manor. At 5:30, the sky in Yuzhou had completely darkened. Under the light, the snowflakes in the air became more and more wanton. Dongqing Wudi buttoned up his coat and walked out of the conference room of the Hidden Dragon Sea with a solemn face. Without talking to anyone, he got into his car. One by one, the directors walked out one after another. The cars parked in front of the conference room left one by one. Dongqing Wudi sat in the back row, leaned against the back of the chair, and let out a long breath. Let's go home. How's it going? The car started slowly. Bai Qingzhao, the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters who personally acted as the driver, asked with a smile. It's hard to say. Dongqing Wudi said slowly, but your matter should be settled. Bai Qingzhao was stunned. His matter. Now his biggest demand was to remove the word deputy from the title of Deputy Secretary General in tomorrow's general election, become the Secretary General of the Army Headquarters, and then enter the Parliament of Jianghu State and become one of its members. This was also a relatively important goal of the giant group, and its importance was even second to Dongqing Wudi's re-election next year. This was also something without much suspense. Next year, Bai Zhanfeng would definitely retire. He would step down as the Speaker of Yuzhou. Even if it was out of an exchange of interests, Bai Qingzhao could replace him. He shook his head and said gloomily, This is not a gain. Of course it is, and it's a big gain. Dongqing Wudi smiled, looked at the snowflakes outside the window, and recalled the content of the meeting. Too many things had happened today. First, the chairman of Hao Yue Group died. This matter attracted everyone's attention at once. Then, before anyone could react, the task force and the General Staff Department submitted reports about the Burning Legion. The most critical witness was killed as soon as he entered the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou. The image of the entire Special Warfare Group's treason suddenly became extremely clear. Li Huaqing held a meeting as soon as possible. It was not a plenary meeting of the parliament. It was a meeting of the 9 directors. The 9 directors could be said to be the leaders of the major groups in Jianghu State. Obviously, Li Huaqing wanted to control the scope of influence when the situation was unclear. In addition to the 9 directors, Gu Xingyun and Yi Dongsheng, the deputy minister of the army headquarters who first discovered the suspicion of the Special Warfare Group's treason. There was no one else in this meeting. At the beginning of the meeting, Yi Dongsheng had already submitted a report on behalf of the General Staff Department. The conclusion reluctantly given by the task force at the first time was regarded as a formal conclusion. In the conclusion, it was already confirmed that Qi Mulin was seriously suspected of treason. 2 years ago, Li Tianlan destroyed the Qi family was just an overreaction, but it could not be regarded as a crime. On the contrary, his approach saved a lot of losses for Jianghu state. Li Tianlan was not guilty. This was the first point that the Southeast Group and the Giant Group wanted to confirm. It seemed unimportant, but in fact, it was very important. Li Tianlan was not guilty, so the 2 years of imprisonment in the desert was Li Tianlan's grievance. Jianghu state must compensate him. Li Tianlan leaving the desert could not be regarded as a prison break. At the same time, some people who asked for severe punishment of Li Tianlan had to pay some price, and those who supported Li Tianlan would also get benefits. What Li Tianlan did next was bound to be highly tolerated by Jianghu state. Li Tianlan was not guilty, so Qi Mulin was guilty. Qi Mulin was Qi Baitsong's adopted son. If something happened to him, Qi Baitsong's reputation would inevitably be fatally damaged. In addition, Black Hawk's confession. The whole Special Warfare Group would be in a precarious situation. At the meeting, Gu Xingyun made a speech that lasted nearly 40 minutes. After the necessary review, he denied all the contents of the confession and said that he did not know the cause of Black Hawk's death. At the same time, he stated that the Special Warfare Group would cooperate with all the subsequent investigations of the Parliament. The Special Warfare Group and the Prince Group were closely connected. At the same time, they thought that confirming Li Tianlan's innocence should not be too hasty. When the Parliament was in a heated debate, the news of Sai City came from the outside world. That incredible sword seemed to completely dispel the spirit of the Special Warfare Group. Gu Xingyun was the first to fall silent. The Giant Group and the Southeast Group echoed each other and confirmed Li Tianlan's innocence at the top meeting of Jianghu State. Li Huaqing acquiesced in this and emphasized that he would communicate with Li Tianlan and give Emperor Dong's palace adequate compensation appropriately. A task force was also formally set up at the meeting. Dongqing Wudi served as the patriarch, and Yi Dongsheng served as the deputy team leader. They transferred real elites from the General Staff Headquarters, the Ministry of Security, and other departments to investigate the Burning Legion and the Special Warfare Group in detail. A lot of things were determined in the nearly 3-hour meeting. Bai Qingzhao's position was naturally determined. It could be seen as a compromise of the Special Warfare Group, or Gu Xingyun's concession in silence. Even without this, I won't have a big problem next year. Bai Qingzhao said in a dull voice. Normally speaking, it's true. Dongqing Wudi said thoughtfully, but now there are some unexpected situations. Bai Qingzhao said, and his eyes became a little fierce. It's not a bad thing. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. A few days ago, I communicated with Saint and military counselor. They seem to want Qingqian to go further, but they didn't say it clearly. Tonight, Tianlan should talk to me about this. Bai Zhanfang retired. Under normal circumstances, Bai Qingzhao or Bai Qingqian could at most be promoted. Now this opportunity was very likely to let both brother and sister go further. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while, then said with a smile, "Let's go home first. There will be hot pot in the evening, and the children will all go there." Bai Qingzhao breathed a sigh of relief and started the car with a smile. At 6 o'clock, the Rolls-Royce with the Yuzhou license plate slowly drove into the Bai family's manor. The back of the car had been isolated. Qin Weibai's face was slightly red. She curled her legs in Li Tianlan's arms and moved. She whispered, "Let me go. We're almost there." "Doesn't it hurt anymore?" Li Tianlan chuckled and carelessly played with a pair of translucent and tender jade feet in his palm as if he was touching the most precious treasure. Qin Weibai rolled her eyes at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were like silk, and she said with hatred, "It doesn't hurt at all. You only know how to bully me." She put in a little effort to stretch her feet out of Li Tianlan's arms, bent down to find her socks, and carefully put them on. She whispered with a smile, "You're going too far." Li Tianlan smiled and was about to say something when a bright light suddenly shone from another direction. It was an Audi with a Jianghu license plate. The car of the Xianxia resident office in Beijing. Qin Weibai whispered, "Is it Speaker Zhou? Or Qiuqi?" Li Tianlan shook his head. The Rolls-Royce and the Audi stopped in front of the Bai family's villa almost at the same time. An elegant and dignified figure came out of the back row of the Audi. She looked at the Rolls-Royce beside her and seemed to wave in surprise. "Sister Qiuqi." Li Tianlan got out of the car and looked at the woman beside the Audi. He was slightly stunned. Dongqing Qiuqi stood there, beautiful and dignified. In the flying snow, she was dressed warmly and held a tightly wrapped object in her arms. An object? Li Tianlan was a little stunned. In his sight, the small object moved slightly. "My daughter." Dongqing Qiuqi greeted Qin Weibai with a smile and looked at Li Tianlan, who was a little stunned. "When did it happen?" Li Tianlan laughed. He had been in the desert for 2 years, but he really hadn't heard of it. "A few months ago." Dongqing Qiuqi smiled softly. "The child is only 6 months old and can't greet people yet, but we can't do without a greeting gift." Li Tianlan smiled and said yes. He looked at the baby in Dongqing Qiuqi's arms curiously. "What's her name? Let's go inside." Dongqing Qiuqi smiled and walked to the villa. She whispered, "Dongqing Yu." Chapter 898. The villa in the manor of the Bai family ushered in a rare lively atmosphere. In fact, there were not too many people in the so-called lively atmosphere. Dongqing Hongguang specially came from Zhongyuan province. Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingqian were husband and wife. Bai Zhanfeng, Bai Qingzhao, Bai Yuming, and their grandchildren. Zhou Yuanshan and Dongqing Qiuqi took their daughter. Then came Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. This was the family dinner of the Bai family. They were all people Li Tianlan was familiar with. Bai Yuming, Zhou Yuanshan, and Dongqing Qiuqi could be said to be the most important people for him now or in the future. Even though Bai Zhanfeng and Bai Qingzhao rarely met Li Tianlan, they had tried their best to help Li Tianlan more than once. But Li Tianlan was not used to this atmosphere. Although everyone behaved naturally at the dining table, and there was no deliberate element in this kind of naturalness, it was as if they naturally regarded Li Tianlan as their family. But Li Tianlan knew very well that he was not their family, at least not on the surface. On the surface, he was Dongqing Wudi's son-in-law. His fiancée was still in a coma in Tiannan recovering from her injuries. As the son-in-law, Li Tianlan took Qin Weibai to the Bai family dinner. No matter how you looked at it, it was a very strange thing. But whether it was Dongqing Wudi, Bai Qingqian, or even Qin Weibai, they did not show the slightest embarrassment. She naturally gave the gifts that she had prepared all afternoon to everyone present. At the dinner table, she was quiet and soft. She called Dongqing Wudi minister, Bai Qingqian aunt, and naturally called Dongqing Hongguang grandpa. Dongqing Hongguang smiled so much that his eyes narrowed. The strange feeling in Li Tianlan's heart became clearer and clearer. It even showed a little. After dinner, he could only focus most of his attention on Dongqing Yu, who was 6 months old. The little girl was very beautiful and quiet. Lying in the stroller, she opened her big black eyes and gently bit her fingers. Li Tianlan found that he seemed to have never been in contact with such a small baby. In the Li family, he was the youngest. After leaving the Li family, it was the first time in the past few years that he had experienced such a scene. Her little body twisted from time to time and made a tender voice. All of this was so fragile in Li Tianlan's eyes that he could not help but want to protect her. "Do you like children?" Bai Qingqian sat beside Li Tianlan and smiled. "When will little Bai have a baby?" Qin Weibai, who seemed to have perfectly integrated into the manner of the Bai family, took out a plate of fruit from the kitchen. Hearing Bai Qingqian's words, she blushed slightly and glanced at Li Tianlan without saying a word. There's no rush. Li Tianlan was even more embarrassed. He hurriedly changed the topic. "Why Dongqing Yu? Doesn't it sound nice?" Dongqing Qiuqi walked over with a smile, stretched out a finger, and gently touched the girl's delicate face. "Nice." Li Tianlan looked at Zhou Yuanshan with some doubts. "Brother-in-law, you don't mind? Normally, the child should be surnamed Zhou." "We've discussed it. If the first one is a daughter, her surname will be Dongqing. Your brother-in-law and I are ready to have a boy to inherit the glory of the Zhou family." Dongqing Qiuqi said with a smile, looking at her daughter with doting and gentle eyes. Li Tianlan smiled and nodded. He glanced at Zhou Yuanshan and said, "Congratulations, brother-in-law." The meaning of this congratulation was extremely rich. It was to congratulate Zhou Yuanshan for becoming the speaker of Xianxia, and also for becoming a father. Zhou Yuanshan was the speaker of Xianxia, and Dongqing Qiuqi was the governor. It was no exaggeration to say that today Zhou Yuanshan could be said to be the most authoritative speaker in the whole Zhongzhou state. His words carried enormous weight, and there would not even be a second voice in Xianxia. With such a powerful environment, as long as it was well managed, 5 years later, when Zhou Yuanshan was in his early 40s, he was fully capable of competing for the position of a member of parliament. Even if it was an alternate member of parliament, it had extraordinary significance for him. At that time, Zhou Yuanshan could be said to have a truly promising future. Same to you. Zhou Yuanshan smiled and waved his hand. Dongqing Hanguang looked at this scene with a smile, looked at Bai Zhanfeng, and nodded slightly. Bai Zhanfeng stood up with a smile and said slowly, "Let's go to the study to talk." "Okay, I'll make you tea." Dongqing Qiuqi laughed. She didn't move, but Dong Chengyu, who was lying in the stroller, seemed to be a little bored. She twisted her body and cried. "I'll go." Qin Weibai stood up, looked at Li Tianlan, who also stood up, and whispered, "Don't smoke so much." Li Tianlan reached out to touch his hair and walked to the study. Dongqing Hanguang and Bai Zhanfeng. Dongqing Wudi and his wife. Li Tianlan and Zhou Yuanshan went upstairs one after another. The study was filled with incense that could refresh one's mind. Dongqing Hanguang sat on the sofa, and his smile gradually faded. He glanced at Dongqing Wudi and went straight to the point. "Tell me about it." Dongqing Wudi sat next to Bai Qingqian, thought for a moment, and said with certainty, "The matter of the Qing dynasty is basically settled. It's not a big problem. The parliament has set up a task force to investigate the special warfare group. There is not much content in today's meeting. Everything is very sudden, and it has just begun. Everyone is still waiting for a relatively clear result. This is a good beginning, and the entry point is very good. Has the Southeast group prepared for it?" Bai Zhanfeng said thoughtfully. "It was prepared 2 years ago." Dongqing Wudi nodded. Black Hawk is a member of the Wang family of Beihai. To be exact, he is a man of sacrifice secretly cultivated by the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai has the divine martial army in Africa, and their influence is very strong. At the beginning of the rise of the Burning Legion, the Wang family of Beihai and the divine martial army have begun to secretly infiltrate the Burning Legion. Over the years, the Burning Legion has secretly cleaned up some of them, but some of them have also taken root in the Burning Legion. Black Hawk is one of them. When Tianlan entered the desert prison, the Wang family of Beihai had full confidence to let him out. So behind the Burning Legion is indeed Kunlun City? Dongqing Hanguang snorted coldly. "I'm sure, but there is no evidence at present." Dongqing Wudi shook his head. The pawns of the Wang family of Beihai can't get the evidence of Kunlun City's direct communication with Ramelun. In fact, most of the confessions today are forged, and only some of them are true, such as the original retreat route of the Burning Legion, and the contact with those people when they lurked in Yuzhou. These are just some clues. They can pull some people of the Special Warfare Group down, but it's difficult to completely implicate Gu Xingyun. At least it's a good start. Zhou Yuanshan said softly. Bai Zhanfeng smiled, glanced at Li Tianlan, and said softly, "Tianlan, what are you going to do next?" "Start with Hao Yue Group and Donghai Investment Group." Li Tianlan's voice was calm. Donghai Investment Group was a large state-owned investment group controlled by Chen Lijuan, Chen Fengqing's daughter. There might be more articles in it than in Hao Yue Group. His current goal was to target the Prince Group and Chen Fengqing. As for the treason case of the Special Warfare Group initiated by the Wang family of Beihai, a large part of the reason was to clear Li Tianlan's name. As for whether Wang Xianxia wanted to get some benefits from the Special Warfare Group, Li Tianlan didn't care. As long as Bai Zhaoqing was promoted with this incident, Li Tianlan would be satisfied. His target would always be Chen Fengqing. Hao Yue Group. Bai Qingqian thought for a moment. "I worked with them when I was in Qinzhou. They handled many projects very cleanly. It can be seen that their chairman is a very cautious person." "It doesn't make sense." Li Tianlan said softly. The Flourishing Age Fund has acquired more than 20% of the shares of Hao Yue Group. It is expected that it can acquire 45% of the shares of Hao Yue Group within a week and become the largest shareholder of Hao Yue Group. If we are lucky, more than 51% of the shares of Hao Yue Group will be acquired by the Flourishing Age Fund. At that time, with absolute control, we can find out the problem internally. Bai Qingqian froze for a moment. Everyone froze for a moment. The Flourishing Age Fund? No one was unfamiliar with the Flourishing Age Fund. It was the world's top financial giant. A financial giant that could directly mobilize trillions of funds. No matter which country it was in, it could be said to be a big shot standing at the top. If it wanted, the Flourishing Age Fund even had the power to influence the development trajectory of Jianghu state. Less than a day after the accident of Hao Yue Group, the Flourishing Age Fund had completed the initial acquisition and held 20% of the shares of Hao Yue Group. In the next week, there was bound to be a bloody storm inside Hao Yue Group. The financial giant, the Flourishing Age Fund, could completely swallow the entire Hao Yue Group if it opened its mouth. The problem was that the Flourishing Age Fund had acquired Hao Yue Group. Why did it let Li Tianlan find out the problem internally? The Flourishing Age Fund, Han Donglu, was the most powerful financier in Asia, a well-known philanthropist in Jianghu state, a super-rich man who had a close relationship with countless important figures in Jianghu state, and whose tentacles went deep into the 6 groups in Jianghu state. Dongqing Hanguang narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan nodded. Let me reintroduce myself. Han Donglu of the Flourishing Age Fund. Codename Military Counselor. His voice was calm. So strictly speaking, the Flourishing Age Fund is now my property. Divine Emperor of 9 Heavens. Chapter 899. The study fell into an absolute silence for a moment. Li Tianlan's voice was very soft. But it had an absolutely powerful impact, which almost broke everyone's normal emotions in an instant. The speaker of the province, the director of Jianghu state, the member of Jianghu state. No matter how knowledgeable they were, it was hard to accept this fact in a short time. The Flourishing Age Fund. Han Donglu. The code name was Military Counselor. The Flourishing Age Fund was the property of Samsara Palace. Until now, the Flourishing Age Fund was Li Tianlan's property? What did this mean? Dongqing Wudi, who had been silent for a full minute, finally came to his senses. He took a deep breath subconsciously and didn't know what it meant for a moment. The Flourishing Age Fund. Emperor Dong's Palace. Han Donglu. Li Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi's eyes became a little confused. Bai Zhanfeng, Bai Qingqian, Zhou Yuanshan. Everyone was a little confused. The Flourishing Age Fund didn't exist for a long time. About a decade ago, they grew rapidly and expanded at an incredible speed. They could be seen in every huge financial storm in the world. They became the planners from the very beginning. Star State, Europe, East Island, Southeast Asia, Snow Country. The financial crises were real bloody storms and whales everywhere. The Flourishing Age Fund seemed to be a prophet, and its dangerous operations reaped miraculous returns. To this day, no one knew how crazy the Flourishing Age Fund was making money. Everyone only saw that their strength was becoming stronger and stronger at an unimaginable speed. Now it had become one of the largest hedge funds in the world. Dongqing Wudi blinked his eyes and tried to digest the explosive news. Li Tianlan had no foreshadowing before, so the news was really unexpected to them, and they were not mentally prepared at all. The Flourishing Age Fund was Li Tianlan's property. First of all, it meant that Li Tianlan and even the entire Emperor Dong's palace would never be short of money in the future. Even if Li Tianlan lost control of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, the Flourishing Age Fund could easily support the development of the entire Emperor Dong's palace. Not to mention the 5 countries in Eastern Europe that were making a lot of money every day. Well, it was easy. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while and shook his head. It was really easy. Secondly, Li Tianlan had invisibly become a partner of a large number of international giants. In this way, Emperor Dong's palace would have no lack of investment in the future. Once this news was exposed, Emperor Dong's palace, which had been developing at a crazy speed, would further develop faster. The power of money would radiate throughout Tiannan and shorten the time for Li Tianlan to unify Tiannan. And then, the close relationship between Han Donglu and the 6 would become Li Tianlan's relationship. No, at the moment, the Special Warfare Group was in a precarious situation, and the Prince Group's foundation was also unstable. A considerable number of people in these two groups would be shaken. Once the fact that the Flourishing Age Fund belonged to Li Tianlan was exposed, sufficient financial resources, absolute military strength, a bright future, and huge support. All of this could make many people of the two groups board Li Tianlan's boat with the help of their relationship with Han Donglu. The Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group were the same. There must be Han Donglu's people in the Giant Group, and so would the Southeast Group. Most importantly, the North Group. All the signs showed that Han Donglu had a strong influence on the North Group, especially the potential leader of the North Group. His relationship with Han Donglu was practically indestructible. Dongqing Wudi suddenly thought of the past 2 years when the Giant Group was reshuffled. The North Group stood firmly on the side of the academics and the Prince Group and took one valuable position after another from the Southeast Group and the Giant Group. The strength of the North Group expanded rapidly. If there was no accident, Zhou Yunhai of the North Group would be re-elected in next year's election, and at least 2 people from the North Group would become the new members of parliament. Was the increased strength of the North Group Li Tianlan's strength? Military Counselor had been preparing for more than 2 years ago. On this day? In the past 2 years, the strength of the Giant Group had shrunk greatly because of the reshuffling. But if the North Group was added, its strength was even stronger than in its heyday. Dongqing Wudi's mind was buzzing. He thought of the most obvious points and felt a little emotional. He believed that it must be more than that. The combination of the Flourishing Age Fund and Emperor Dong's palace would completely cause a series of chain reactions. The Flourishing Age Fund made up for all the shortcomings of Emperor Dong's palace, whether in wealth or politics. There were more things that Emperor Dong's palace could not see at the moment. Jianghu State had made several secret asset evaluations on the Flourishing Age Fund, but all the evaluation reports were not comprehensive and could not even get a general outline. Han Donglu had been too low-key before, at least in Jianghu State. Not many people knew what he had done in Jianghu State. He subconsciously took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a deep breath and asked with some uncertainty, "Really?" He knew that Li Tianlan could not bullshit on this matter. If he had not gotten military counselor's promise or even allegiance, and was 100% sure that the Flourishing Age Fund was under his control, then even if Han Donglu was really military counselor, Li Tianlan would not have told him the news. The fact that he could say it meant that military counselor had fully proved his loyalty. The destruction of the Samsara Palace, the death of the master of Samsara Palace, and everything that once belonged to her were completely given to Li Tianlan by her. And it seemed that all of this was not out of control at present. Except for the one in Northern Europe. Dongqing Wudi suddenly felt a little complicated. It was a kind of feeling that could not be put into words. "Really?" Li Tianlan simply nodded. "You?" Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath, and his heart became more and more complicated. He thought of the master of Samsara Palace again. Everyone thought that the Samsara Palace had no power in Jianghu State. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City had always been very vigilant against other forces entering Jianghu State in the past. But who could have thought that without anyone noticing, the Samsara Palace had already extended its hands to Mount Shu and even set up the Flourishing Age Fund? He shook his head and whispered, "Now if everything goes well, you can totally set up a new group." The others finally came to their senses. Bai Qingqian breathed a sigh of relief and nodded. Indeed, a new group may not be as good as the academics and the Southeast Group, but in terms of potential, it is definitely the most promising of all groups. If there was no accident. Dongqing Wudi spoke very cautiously. But in fact, everyone knew that it was almost impossible for there to be an accident. The Flourishing Age Fund made up for all the shortcomings and defects of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan had all the connections, resources, wealth, and absolutely powerful forces. What Emperor Dong's palace lacked most now was the foundation accumulated over a long period of time. But the new forces generally had strong cohesion, which could make up for this to a certain extent. Although Emperor Dong's palace had no foundation, the Purgatory of Heaven capital inherited many things from the Li family. Li Tianlan was bound to take over the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Then Emperor Dong's palace would almost be another Wang family of Beihai. And it would be a replica of the Wang family of Beihai, the chosen one and the dynasty. This was a magnificent event that everyone was looking forward to. "That's exactly what I'm thinking." Li Tianlan nodded and said slowly, "That's what I'm going to do next." Dongqing Wudi froze for a moment and instantly understood what Li Tianlan meant. You want to set up a new group? Li Tianlan replied with a hum. Dongqing Wudi vaguely understood what Li Tianlan wanted to talk to Bai Qingqian today. He smiled and whispered, when I communicated with the president today, the president mentioned Prime Minister Hua and said that you seem to have a different view. I see. Li Tianlan did not agree to let Hua Vangyang go further because he wanted to leave enough room for his group to develop. As the situation became clear, Wu Zhengmin was likely to become a director from a counselor this time. No matter what position, a director was enough to support the top structure of a group. However, with the resources Li Tianlan had now, it was difficult to find a suitable candidate for counselor. So, Dongqing Wudi glanced at his wife. Without any hesitation, he nodded and said with a smile, Yes, now the time is very suitable. I will fully support you. Thank you, Minister. Li Tianlan nodded seriously and glanced at Bai Qingqian, intentionally or unintentionally. Bai Qingqian raised her eyebrows slightly and said with a soft smile, Do you want me to go there? The word past was easy to say, but it wasn't easy to do. Li Tianlan had a good relationship with the giant group. The new group would certainly have a good relationship with the giant group. But there were bound to be different voices inside any group. This was the same as the existence of different groups in any country. It was unavoidable. Moreover, the structure of the giant group was relatively loose. The new group and the giant group could maintain the same general direction, which was already a reflection of their excellent relationship. There were bound to be conflicts in all aspects in daily life. Bai Qingqian had to change her position from the giant group to the new group. And it was a very clear change. The most direct change was that Bai Qingqian would definitely support the policy that was beneficial to Emperor Dong's palace when it was in line with the interests of Zhongzhou state. This might hurt the interests of some people in the giant group, intentionally or unintentionally. Li Tianlan lit a cigarette and was silent for a while. Then he whispered, Yes, and I hope brother-in-law will come. His voice was calm, and he didn't hide his ambition and purpose at all. Asking Bai Qingqian to come here might be regarded as an emergency. He hoped that Wu Zhengmin and Bai Qingqian could lay out the layout for the new group in the next 5 years. But asking Zhou Yuanshan to come to the new group was tantamount to telling Dongqing Wudi that he wanted to take away the future of the giant group. He would constantly absorb fresh blood from the giant group, absorb the forces around him, and absorb the forces that could unite into the new group. The new group would be completely dominated by him. In short, it was annexation. Annexation of the giant group. It was naked, without any disguise. Dongqing Wudi's eyes remained unchanged. He chuckled and said, Yes, as I said, I fully support it. Bai Qingqian also nodded. The reshuffle of the giant group was to get rid of those who didn't recognize Li Tianlan's position. If Li Tianlan could set up a new group and slowly absorb the forces that recognized Li Tianlan, it would be better. After all, no matter how the giant group was reshuffled, its relatively loose structure was difficult to change. Li Tianlan's body shook slightly. He took a deep look at Dongqing Wudi. The corner of his mouth moved, but he didn't make a sound. The door of the study was pushed open. Qin Wei Bai, who played the role of a waitress, came in with brewed tea and took away the cigarette from Li Tianlan's mouth when she went out. I have no opinion. Zhou Yuanshan laughed. He knew what he represented here today. He represented not only himself but also another pillar of the giant group, the Zhou family. Which position do you want Qingqian to take? Bai Zhanfeng said with a smile. He directly cut into the development of the new group, which was a tacit acquiescence to Li Tianlan's idea. Dongqing Wudi, Bai Zhanfeng, Zhou Yuanshan. The 3 pillars of the giant group had all expressed their support. Li Tianlan breathed a sigh of relief and whispered, The cabinet. The deputy prime minister of the cabinet? Taking over Wu Zhengmin's position? Wu Zhengmin taking over Hua Zhengyang's position? In that case, Bai Zhanfeng frowned. If this operation was successful, the new group would have a great influence in the cabinet. But in this way, the position of the head of the cabinet would become more sensitive than it was now. What do you think of the prime minister's position? Bai Zhanfeng said slowly. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and whispered, Wen Siyuan. Chapter 900. Wen Siyuan. Chairman of Beihai. Wen Siyuan. More than a year ago, it was almost certain that it would be very difficult for Wen Siyuan to become the new director. But more than a year ago or even earlier, Wen Siyuan was the candidate that the Southeast Group was going to promote as the new prime minister. If it weren't for the constant turmoil of the Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai in recent years, Wen Siyuan would have become the new prime minister without any suspense. With the turmoil of the Southeast Group, there was an obvious vacancy in the position of prime minister, so this position had become the most competitive position at this time. Bai Zhanfeng thought about it and glanced at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi frowned slightly, deep in thought. Not bad. Dongqing Hongguang suddenly laughed with some appreciation in his voice. Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly. It was really good, but it didn't mean that the next thing would be simple. Pushing Wen Siyuan to be promoted would definitely get the strong support of the Southeast Group, and he would also get the Southeast Group's return. Wu Jingmin's matter would no longer be a problem, and Bai Qingqian's position could basically be confirmed. The only thing he had to consider was that after Wen Siyuan entered the cabinet, he would not be easy to deal with in the future. Compared to the aggressive Chen Fengqing, Wen Siyuan's personality was more stable. His foresight might be slightly inferior to Chen Fengqing's, but his ability to control the overall situation was stronger. If Wu Zhengmin and Bai Qingqian could become the Deputy Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister respectively, the new group would become extremely powerful in the cabinet. However, if Wen Siyuan became the Prime Minister, Wu Zhengmin and Bai Qingqian would definitely be greatly constrained at some point. After all, the cooperation between the giant group and the Southeast Group was in the honeymoon period, but in essence, it was a mutual benefit. After the election next year, both sides would calm down and the cooperation would naturally end naturally. At that time, the cabinet, whether it was the Southeast Group represented by Wen Siyuan or the new group, would constantly check and balance each other, and neither side would be too comfortable. However, promoting Wen Siyuan was the plan with the least resistance. Although it would be troublesome, it was the most acceptable situation for the new group. The problem was, what would Hua Zhangyang do if Wen Siyuan became the head of the cabinet? At present, Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai declared war on the prince group. The support of the academics was quite important, so they would also be the final winner. They had to reap their own benefits. Hua Zhangyang's arrangement couldn't be too bad. If the most important balance couldn't be achieved, such a transaction naturally wouldn't go smoothly. If that's the case, Hua Zhangyang won't have a suitable position. Zhou Yuanshan said thoughtfully. Yes and no. Bai Zhanfeng shook his head. Li Huaqing, Dongqing Wudi, Hua Zhangyang, Wu Jingmin, Yi Dongsheng, Wang Qinglei, Zhou Yunhai, Guo Wentian. After the election, 8 of the 9 directors had been confirmed. Among them, Li Huaqing, Dongqing Wudi, Hua Zhangyang, Guo Wentian and Zhou Yunhai were re-elected. Among the 5 people, the positions of Li Huaqing, Dongqing Wudi, and Zhou Yunhai could not be changed. There were only a few positions. If Hua Zhangyang did not control the cabinet, he would have very little choice. Zhou Mulin's position in the council could hardly satisfy the academics. To Hua Zhangyang, that position was a step backward. Hua Zhangyang would not be satisfied with Guo Wentian's position in the National Assembly either. If he couldn't become the prime minister, he would basically have to choose one of the 2 positions occupied by the Wang family of Beihai. Only in this way, along with some other compensations, would there be a possibility of the Academy accepting it. Department of Supervision. Or the Vice President of Human Resources. Those 2 positions were what the Giant Group and the Southeast Group could offer but didn't want to. No matter which position Hua Zhangyang took, it would not be less helpful to Li Huaqing than if Hua Zhangyang became the Prime Minister. If he became the Vice President, then Li Huaqing and Hua Zhangyang would cooperate and hold the personnel power of Zhongzhou State tightly. This influence would not dissipate easily even after he retired. Go to the Department of Supervision? The Department of Supervision was in charge of the violations of all officials in Zhongzhou State. If Hua Zhangyang took this position, it meant that the Vice President of Human Resources was someone else. It would probably be Wang Qinglei. In this way, the candidate of the Ministry of Personnel would inevitably be Li Huaqing's confidant. In addition, Hua Zhangyang of the Department of Supervision. One was in charge of the appointment of national officials, and the other was in charge of the violations of national officials. It was enough to make people's scalps tingle when they thought about it. Should I make an appointment with the people of the Southeast Group and have a talk? Dongqing Wudi leaned on the sofa and whispered to himself. I'll go to the Wang family of Beihai after a while. Li Tianlan lowered his head and said lightly, I'll talk to Wang Xiangxiao. Dongqing Wudi nodded. I'll find a chance to communicate with the president. He took a deep breath and shook his head slightly. Next year's election was almost the most complicated in recent decades. The rise of the new group would impact the pattern of the entire Jianghu state. How to form a situation acceptable to all parties was a test of everyone's wisdom. Dongqing Wudi rubbed his forehead and suddenly said, When will you go to Beihai? It depends. Li Tianlan whispered. In the next few days, all the problems of Hao Yue group will be exposed and fully affect the Prince group. Military counselor is talking to some people in the Prince group. If it goes well, there will be a second voice in the Prince group. In addition, Minister, the accountability of the Beijiang military region will also begin. Everyone in the Beijiang military region who died in the battle can't become a martyr. Dongqing Wudi nodded and said solemnly, I've sent an investigation team down. If the tens of thousands of people in the Beijiang military region who died in the battle this time couldn't become martyrs, then it could be imagined how disappointed other people in the Beijiang military region would be, and how disappointed the important military figures who belong to the Prince group would be. Li Tianlan wanted to make the entire Prince group completely split step by step. Chen Fengqing won't sit still. Dongqing Wudi said slowly. Of course. Li Tianlan nodded and said with a sneer. His only way now is to resist the pressure to destroy the Wang family of Beihai. If he succeeds, the southeast group will fall apart and the Wang family of Beihai will be completely destroyed. With huge benefits, all of us will focus on the southeast group, and the Prince group can also take advantage of this opportunity to enhance its strength. So he will definitely contact those foreign forces and speed up the advance of the final battle in Beihai. When there is clear news from Beihai, it will be the time for me to go to Beihai. The more Chen Fengqing wants to do, the more I will make him unable to do it. Dongqing Wudi smiled and said, During this time, stay in Yuzhou? I'll introduce some people to you. He had never thought that Li Tianlan would set up a new group. This was mainly because he didn't know the identity of military counselor. Therefore, the whole giant group was the team that Dongqing Wudi prepared for Li Tianlan. If there was no military counselor, Li Tianlan would be the leader of the giant group in the future. But now that military counselor had built a better team of the new group, Dongqing Wudi naturally had to speed up the transfer of part of the power of the giant group to the new group. Li Tianlan had never seen many of them, so it was a good opportunity to do so. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and whispered, I plan to go back to Tiannan tomorrow. Go back to Tiannan. Emperor Dong's palace was his foundation. But since the appearance of Emperor Dong's palace, he seemed to have only been to Tiannan once. Li Tianlan laughed at himself and continued, The victims of the nightmare troop will be buried the day after tomorrow. I have to go back to see them off. Dongqing Wudi glanced at Li Tianlan and whispered, It's my duty. There's one more thing. Li Tianlan lowered his eyes slightly and whispered, Military counselor is already looking for her. Minister, if possible, help me find Yuetong's whereabouts. Looking for Wang Yuetong. Zhou Yuanshan narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Tianlan seriously. Dongqing Wudi nodded and said, Okay. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. His laughter was very low and had a very strange tone to it. He looked up at Dongqing Wudi's eyes and said seriously, Minister, am I going too far? Dongqing Wudi's body stiffened for a moment. Why? Li Tianlan chuckled and said, Aren't you going to say something? Dongqing Wudi moved the corner of his mouth and subconsciously glanced at Bai Qingqian beside him. Bai Qingqian clenched her hands and her face was a little pale. Tianlan Wei. Bai Qingqian tried to speak. Li Tianlan suddenly interrupted her and said with a smile, No hurry, let's talk about it next time. He didn't wait for Bai Qingqian to say anything and turned his eyes to Zhou Yuanshan. Brother-in-law, I want to talk to you alone. Zhou Yuanshan was stunned and nodded. Okay. Let's go out first. Dongqing Wudi forced a smile, stood up and walked out of the study. His pace was a little hurried. Everyone left the study in turn. Only Zhou Yuanshan sat where he was. Bai Qingqian walked at the end. When she passed by Li Tianlan, she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Li Tianlan moved his eyes away. Bai Qingqian forced a smile and seemed to reach out to touch Li Tianlan's head. But she finally withdrew her hand and left the study. Zhou Yuanshan watched all this quietly. He looked at Li Tianlan, whose face was a little complicated. Why don't you let them go on? He asked suddenly. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time and then whispered, Does it make sense? Yes. Zhou Yuanshan nodded seriously. He hesitated and asked tentatively, Are you suspecting something? Not suspecting. Li Tianlan nodded. I'm not a fool. I want to know an answer, but suddenly I feel, he paused and whispered, That's also good. Well, that's good. That's it. In the living room downstairs, Dongqing Qiuqi took her daughter Dongqing Yu out of the stroller and put her beside her. The baby, who was a few months old, had fallen asleep. Qin Weibai, Bai Yuming, and Dongqing Qiuqi were sitting on the sofa and chatting. Seeing Dongqing Wudi come out first, Qin Weibai and others stood up at the same time. Minister, where's Tianlan? Qin Weibai asked softly. Dongqing Wudi forced a smile and said softly, He's chatting with Yuan Shan. Qin Weibai nodded and said yes. Looking at Dongqing Hongguang and Bai Qingqian who came out later, she smiled and said, I'll wash the fruit for you. Boss Qin. Little Bai. Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingqian spoke at the same time. They were husband and wife, but they called her by different names. Qin Weibai said and looked back at the two. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath and said softly, Thank you. Qin Weibai smiled and said nothing. Bai Qingqian came over, took Qin Weibai's hand, stared at her dreamy perfect face, and said softly with a smile, Stay tonight and chat with me. Qin Weibai hesitated. She wanted to say that it depended on Li Tianlan, but when the words came to her mouth, she nodded and said, Okay. Dongqing Wudi looked away and said softly, From now on, you and Tianlan will stay in Tiannan and take care of him. We are all at ease with you by his side. He paused, as if he didn't know if it was appropriate for him to say this, but he shook his head and continued with a smile. Of course, if he bullies you and feels wronged, you can tell your aunt at any time. You can also tell me, and we can help you teach. No, we can talk to him. Qin Weibai took a deep look at Dongqing Wudi. A slight smile bloomed from the corner of her mouth. She held Bai Qingqian's hand, nodded to Dongqing Wudi, and said with a smile, Thank you, Dad. Dongqing Wudi's body suddenly stiffened. Bai Qingqian's body trembled and subconsciously held Qin Weibai's hand. She lowered her head, and her eyes turned red for a moment. Chapter 901. Weak and soft lights filled the somewhat dark hall, and the inconspicuous light illuminated all the important corners of the hall. Huge and sophisticated instruments were placed in a disorderly manner, connected to screens. In the middle of the hall, there was a row of utensils that could be used for people to lie in. Strictly speaking, this was the best nutrition chamber, or hibernation chamber, but just by looking at its appearance, it looked like a neatly arranged coffin. The air in the hall was cool, and it looked extremely clean and tidy. Countless instruments made a slight buzzing sound when they were in operation. The instruments that were always in operation, the cold and empty hall, and the continuous buzzing sound. All of this seemed to be completely frozen in the dark environment, like a frozen oil painting. On the left side of the hall was an elevator. At this moment, the arrow on the elevator screen slowly jumped down, and finally stopped completely. Primary authority confirmed, Level 2 authority confirmed, Highest authority confirmed, please enter the password. The voice in the elevator sounded in the hall at the same time. The password is correct, please enter your fingerprint. Activate the pupil recognition system. Please enter the password. The password is correct. Welcome, Doctor. In the mechanical electronic sound, the elevator door slowly opened. A young woman with short hair and a delicate face walked into the hall. Behind her on both sides were two middle-aged men with serious and rigorous temperaments. A middle-aged man immediately pressed a red button in the hall. At the same time, countless screens in the hall lit up almost at the same time, dispelling the darkness in the hall. Countless data slowly flowed on each screen. The young woman, who looked to be in her 20s, raised her head and looked at the huge screen in the center. A large amount of data was reflected in her charming silver pupils, and her expression was quiet, serious, and focused. Another middle-aged man took a folder and walked over, and said in a low voice, Dr. Naylan, this is the key physical data of medical record number 2. The initial data was 3 days ago, and the last record was 6 hours ago. Naylan Shuriying, who had short hair and silver eyes, was quiet and focused, took the folder and the pen in the folder. The physical data recorded on the folder were simplified symbols that only professionals could understand. Nalan Shuriying drew on the more important symbols with a thoughtful look in her eyes. She quickly browsed through the folder in her hand, walked forward, and arrived in front of a hibernation chamber. The middle-aged assistant turned on the light button of the hibernation pod. Under the faint light, everything in the hibernation pod was immediately presented to Nalan Shuriying's eyes. Inside the hibernation chamber was a man who looked thin and short. Perhaps because he had been lying there for a long time, his hair was very long and looked extremely messy. It made his face look even paler. He was lying flat and was completely covered in a large amount of foam. He was so quiet that he looked like a lifelike human specimen. Nalan Shuriying looked at him for a while and remained silent. The man in the hibernation pod was so frail and small. Who would have thought that he was a big shot standing at the peak of the dark world before he fell into a coma? They were not at the peak of this era. They belonged to the peak of the Sword Emperor's era. There were chosen ones, half-step chosen ones, and the peak of the invincible realm in that era. His most powerful time was very short, but in that short period of time, he successfully killed Arcis, an expert at the peak of the invincible realm in the state of coronation, killed thousands of the most elite saint warriors of the Vatican, and he had even heavily injured the Sword Emperor, who had almost stepped into the ranks of geniuses. Xianxia. The Vatican might not forget this name for a very long time. Nalan Shuriying shook her head slightly and looked at the small screens on the edge of the hibernation pod. His heartbeat was normal, and his breathing was normal. She pressed a button, and an X-ray quickly appeared on an instrument on the other side. Nalan Shuriying took the X-ray and looked at it carefully for a while. Then she nodded and said, "His body has basically recovered." Tribulation was sent to Tiannan about half a month ago. Yu Zhou had basically determined his physical state, but they still couldn't wake him up. Emperor Dong's palace took the initiative to take Tribulation over and started the deepest level of treatment and observation. All the physical data showed that Tribulation's muscles had returned to normal, and his bones had begun to heal slowly. At present, he was close to the level of a normal person. But he was still unconscious. Nalan Shuriying looked at him and was silent for a while. Then she whispered, "Continue to observe." The two assistants froze for a moment and said subconsciously, "Observe." In their original plan, if Tribulation's body was really normal but he couldn't wake up, the next thing they should consider was different levels of mental stimulation. Observe first. Nalan Shuriying nodded and said, "His Highness Li Tianlan will come back in the near future. We'll see what he thinks then." The two assistants nodded and didn't say much. Nalan Shuriying handed the document in her hand to the assistant and walked to another hibernation pod. "How's the situation of medical record number 1? "Same as always," the assistant said with a bitter smile. "Her body is still slowly recovering, but in a short time, there is no hope of recovering to the level of a normal person. We often monitor her brainwaves, and the data is even lower than that of medical record number 1. Her body is quite seriously damaged, and it can be said that she is infinitely close to death." Nalan Shuriying's footsteps paused. "No." She shook her head and whispered, "You haven't seen a person who is really infinitely close to death." He came to the hibernation pod in the middle and turned on the light source. In the hibernation pod, Dongqing Rushi, who was covered with foam, closed her eyes and didn't move. Nalan Shuriying watched all this quietly. Her heart was heavy, and her body was a little cold. Dongqing Rushi had been in a coma for 2 years. Her body was indeed getting better. But there was still a long time before she really recovered and woke up. A very, very long time. It was so long that Nalan Shuriying couldn't even see hope. 2 years ago, Li Tianlan almost overturned the entire Beihai province. One of the most important contents of his deal with the Wang family of Beihai was to ask the Wang family of Beihai to completely cure Dongqing Rushi. So Nalan Shuriying was sent to Tiannan by summer solstice with the most advanced equipment and a top medical team. But today, she was completely sure that the progress they had made could not satisfy Li Tianlan, who was about to return to Tiannan. The situation in Beihai had been extremely tense. Nalan Shuriying was not sure whether Dongqing Rushi's condition would make the situation facing Beihai worse. She stared blankly at Dongqing Rushi, who was motionless in the hibernation pod, and was silent for a long time. "Observe closely." After a long time, she took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "I stay in the lab most of the time. If anything happens, tell me immediately. Understood. The two assistants spoke at the same time. Nalan Shuriying nodded, walked aside, and turned on a computer that was connected to all the equipment. She took out a folder again and began to record the latest physical data of Dongqing Rushi and Tribulation. The two assistants were carefully inspecting the sophisticated equipment in the hall and doing their daily maintenance. No one spoke. The hall became quiet again. Without anyone noticing, the space in the dimly lit hall began to tremble slightly. The transparent air seemed to become a line. The tiny line continued to spread and spread to the side of Dongqing Rushi's hibernation pod. The whole air suddenly twisted for a moment. A man in black appeared beside Dongqing Rushi. The dense sword energy completely wrapped Dongqing Rushi's hibernation pod, and in an instant, it became an independent space. The fingers of the man in black shook slightly. More sword energy appeared outside the independent space. The sword energy shook the air and quickly turned into another hibernation pod made of pure sword energy. Nalan Shuriying unconsciously raised her head and glanced in the direction of Dongqing Rushi. The hibernation pod was still there, and the light was still on. She sighed softly, lowered her head, and continued to copy the data. The man in black stood there quietly, looking down at Dongqing Rushi, who seemed to have no breath of life in the hibernation pod, with a complicated look in his eyes. It was a kind of complicated look that contained countless emotions. Blame, love, helplessness, guilt, and bitterness. He gently put his palm on the hibernation pod, slightly narrowed his eyes, and laughed self-deprecatingly. Why didn't you ever think? Why did Jade Pool give you the silent sword? Why didn't you ever think that it was abnormal for the Dongqing clan to brainwash you again and again for so many years? Silence gave you the destructive power of the invincible realm when you were in the thunder-shocking realm, at the cost of your own life. After so many years of brainwashing, plus silence, how obvious is that? The Dongqing clan just wanted to keep you by his side, to use you as his most powerful safeguard before he grew up. In East Island, I stopped you from drawing the sword for the first time. Didn't you realize something? I'm disappointed. His voice gradually deepened. I'm disappointed in you. Dongqing Rushi, who was in the hibernation pod, didn't move. So stupid. The man in black breathed a sigh of relief and sneered. Your mother betrayed me for you. Why did you do that? You're not even as good as her. You made yourself like this. Who came to see you in the past 2 years? What did you get for lying down for 2 years? If I give you another chance, I don't know if you'll regret it. The man in black stared at Dongqing Rushi deeply and said in a low voice, Is it worth it? If this is a deal, I don't think it's fair. He whispered to himself, and his eyes fell on the heart rate detector screen of the hibernation pod. Looking at the numbers on the screen, he was silent for a long time. I'm disappointed. He spoke again. Dongqing Rushi didn't respond, and she was destined not to give any response. The man in black laughed softly. You're willing to die for him, so he should be willing to die for you. Only in this way, it's fair. He straightened his body bit by bit and said in a calm voice, I'll send him down and wait for you. What do you say? Chapter 902. In the quiet hall, Nalan Shuriying slowly stood up. She recorded the latest body data of Dongqing Rushi and Tribulation respectively, planning to leave here and go to her own lab to study. The subtle and imperceptible sword energy space began to separate layer by layer. The black-clothed man silently followed Nalan Shuriying into the elevator. The elevator slowly went up 15 meters underground. He entered the password 3 times on the way and finally came to the surface. The elevator opened, and Nalan Shuriying walked out and went in another direction. The black-clothed man, who was calm and indifferent, seemed to have no emotions and aura, glanced at Nalan Shuriying and slowly walked out of the elevator. Outside the elevator was an incredibly grand hall. The length of thousands of meters was divided into rooms. In the central area, there was a rockery, a fish pond, and a small garden. The huge space and the nearly 20-meter-high dome made the whole hall look magnificent. Standing in it, everyone could feel their own insignificance. It was not a hall, but a small square. The black-clothed man watched quietly. In his sight, the combatants and civil servants of Emperor Dong's palace kept coming in and out, in 2s and 3s, constantly talking about something. There were not many people in Emperor Dong's palace, so this very advanced hall seemed extremely empty. The black-clothed man stood there for a while, then silently moved forward and walked out of the main entrance of the hall. The main entrance of the hall was a huge fountain square. Thousands of fountains were constantly spraying transparent water columns. The water columns rose tens of meters into the sky and converged in the center. A majestic and awe-inspiring pitch-black greatsword stood in the center of the water column. The greatsword was as tall as the huge castle behind the black-clothed man. Countless splashes of water slowly flowed on the greatsword, sparkling with colorful rays of light under the sunlight. The black-clothed man's mouth twitched. He had almost never seen such a large fountain square. Not to mention in Tiannan, even in Yuzhou, a fountain square of this scale could almost be regarded as a landmark. He narrowed his eyes, smiled self-mockingly and whispered, "This is really the style of a nouveau riche." His figure directly passed by the fountain square, straight ahead, and stepped on a verdant lawn. There was a group of white pigeons that were not afraid of humans on the lawn. Several young women of Emperor Dong's palace seemed to be feeding the pigeons on the lawn during the break. The white pigeons fluttered their wings and landed on their palms to peck the corn in their palms, causing a burst of crisp and energetic laughter. A large golden retriever lay lazily in the middle of the lawn. Before the man in black could approach, the big dog that was lying lazily in the grass had already straightened its body and was looking straight in the direction of the man in black. The black-clothed man's body suddenly stiffened. He felt awkward and incredulous at the same time. He looked at the golden retriever in front of him, confused. He couldn't understand how the golden retriever had discovered him. The seemingly docile big dog slowly arched its body and let out a low growl, as if it would pounce at any moment. The man in black frowned. The sword chi around him vibrated slightly. The golden retriever's tail suddenly stood up, and its body tensed up to the extreme. "It can't see me, but it can feel the surrounding sword chi?" The man in black frowned. His figure flickered, and he instantly passed by the golden retriever. The golden retriever whimpered and turned around twice. It seemed to be a little confused. It ran around for a while, and it seemed to feel no danger. It whimpered and lazily patted down again. "What the hell is going on?" the man in black muttered to himself. He passed by the lawn and stepped on a wide arch bridge. Under the arch bridge was a clear stream. The circulating water surrounded the entire Emperor Dong's palace. It was a huge artificial lake. The man in black stood at the other end of the bridge and looked back at Emperor Dong's palace. The huge six-story castle of Emperor Dong's palace was facing the pitch-black giant sword in front of the gate. It was like a giant standing in front of a hill, so tall and majestic, with a large shadow that almost blocked the sun. The man in black glanced at it expressionlessly, then turned around and left. His figure was getting farther and farther away. On the edge of the magnificent and huge Emperor Dong's palace was a busy construction site. It was very noisy. Construction teams from different places were busy with their own work. The place where the black-robed men were supposed to be building an office building. Were they planning a camp further away? Or a canteen? It was destined to become the area of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. But at present, the construction site was much larger than the already built Emperor Dong's palace. The man in black could clearly feel the footsteps and ambitions of Emperor Dong's palace. It was destined to be the center of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. And the entire Shenyuan city would be absorbed by Emperor Dong's palace bit by bit. Shopping malls, schools, hospitals, supermarkets, clubs. Everything in the city would become a part of Emperor Dong's palace. There would no longer be ordinary citizens here. The residents here would be the staff of Emperor Dong's palace, the combatants, and their families. The city would become Li Tianlan's private territory, with a small population, a comfortable environment, luxurious facilities, a lot of funds, and citizens of the city. Many years later, it would inevitably become one of the most beautiful cities in Jianghu State, one of the most prosperous cities, and the city with the strongest concentration of residents. That was the new city plan. It was a plan that basically copied the ideas of the Wang family of Beihai, but it summarized some defects of Mount Dibing, so it became more perfect in the later stage. The man in black walked out of the construction site and looked at the city that was changing almost every day. He was silent for a long time. That was the scene of his dream. It was also the future that he had fantasized about a long time ago. It was also the future that a wealthy family that could maintain aggression against all forces and countries and unite around a hegemon-level country should have in his mind. He had imagined many times a scene similar to that of Emperor Dong's palace today. But he couldn't do it. Even if he now controlled the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Even if the Purgatory of Heaven capital was still a superpower in the dark world. But no money. That was the most painful point. Li Guangtu, dressed in black, had a twisted and complicated expression. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was equivalent to the former Li family. But the former Li family did not represent the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Purgatory of Heaven capital, which collapsed and gathered again, did inherit a lot of things from the Li family, including wealth, talents in all aspects, and powerful warriors. But after all, it was not the complete Li family. He had lurked in East Island for many years and accumulated a lot of wealth. Li Guangtu was rich. An investment of hundreds of millions or even billions was not a problem for him. He could even get tens of billions. But compared with Li Tianlan, the little money he had made him look like a pauper. When he first heard about the new city plan, it was like a joke. The income generated by the 5 countries in Eastern Europe was indeed terrifying. And the flourishing age fund had invested a lot in Emperor Dong's palace. Under normal circumstances, Li Tianlan was not short of money. But no one believed that Emperor Dong's palace could really start the new city plan. The establishment of Xianxia city was like a signal. Dong Huang in the shortest time possible, the palace had invested all of its financial resources into Xianxia city. Money was consumed crazily and Xianxia city continued to develop. Even during the period when Jianghu state gradually reduced its support for Xianxia city, Emperor Dong's palace did not stop. Where did the money come from? This was the question that puzzled Li Guangtu the most. The professionals of the Purgatory of Heaven capital had already made professional statistics. Even if the interests of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe were beyond imagination, Emperor Dong's palace could not mobilize such a huge amount of funds. As Jianghu state's attitude became clearer, the wealthy families that invested in Emperor Dong's palace became more cautious. Such a situation was bound to cause a break in the capital of Emperor Dong's palace. But here was the problem. Not only did Emperor Dong's palace not have a problem with its funds, but they could mobilize more and more money. This could be seen from the overall transformation of Xianxia city. The construction and expansion of Emperor Dong's palace and the overall transformation of Xianxia city. In nearly a year, Chongning Chenqing, Xianxia city, launched dozens of large-scale projects in a row. They really did not consider the problem of a break in the capital. In fact, their capital did not break. The Purgatory of Heaven capital had not figured out where the money came from. But today, where the money came from was no longer important. What mattered was that the new city plan of Emperor Dong's palace was actually possible to be realized. At this rate it would take at most 5 years. 5 years later, Xianxia city would become a complete Emperor Dong's palace. With all kinds of resources coming in continuously, it meant that in 6 or 7 years at most, the whole Tiannan would become the back garden of Emperor Dong's palace. What everyone did not know, or subconsciously ignored, was Li Guangtu's current martial arts. To be exact, it was the secret that he suddenly appeared after many years of dormancy. In the past 2 decades, in everyone's impression, the biggest traitor in Jianghu state had already fallen. Summer Solstice had resisted Li Guangtu's attack with a murderous weapon at the cost of her martial arts foundation. While destroying the murderous weapon, she had almost completely destroyed Li Guangtu's martial arts foundation. He had completely fallen under the siege of several invincible realm experts, and many experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. This was everyone's impression. No one knew that he could recover, lurk in East Island, and set up the Purgatory of Heaven capital. When the Purgatory of Heaven capital first appeared, deity, who could compete with Wang Tianzong, could be said to be brilliant. But except for a few people, no one knew the true identity of deity. His identity was completely exposed in the chaos in Eastern Europe 2 years ago. But with the eternal sword above Mormons ending Wang Tianzong, that era had come to an end. Maybe someone would pay attention to Wang Tianzong. But there were very few people who paid attention to Li Guangtu. There were even fewer people who paid attention to Li Guangtu's martial arts. Almost no one wanted to know how Li Guangtu could set foot on the peak of the invincible realm when his foundation was almost ruined. The martial arts that Li Guangtu had been exposed to since he was a child was the 24 moves of sword. The 24 moves of sword of the Li family. but it also contained a lot of the strengths of the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan's martial arts. All his martial arts foundation had completed a most desperate nirvana when the foundation was almost completely ruined. He embarked on his own path when he was in the worst state. The longevity seal and the immortal seal. The inspiration absorbed from the 24 moves of sword transformed into a new unique technique, which became the key to reshaping his foundation. The most important thing was that he used to have the dragon vein, although it was only a part of the dragon vein. Now, although his dragon vein had inexplicably disappeared, a large amount of vitality was still nourishing his flesh and blood. Powerful recovery ability. Martial arts that reshaped the foundation. All of this meant that no matter how serious his injury was, as long as he was not dead, he could recover faster than others and other experts at the same level. In the chaos in Eastern Europe, he was the first to wake up from a coma. He stayed in Tiannan for 2 years and didn't make a move. Everyone thought that his injury was serious, or even completely destroyed. He stood in the darkness where no one could see and silently recovered from his injury. His injury was more serious than that of Lin Fengting. But today, his state was even slightly better than Lin Fengting's. Those injuries had not healed yet. But now he was the real #1 expert in the dark world. Li Guangtu was not in a hurry. He was not in a hurry at all. He felt that he still had enough time. The game between Beihai, Jianghu State, and the giant group had been in a stalemate. One advanced and the other retreated, and the 3 parties were trying their best to maintain a balance. Before the result of the game came out, it was difficult for Li Tianlan to get out of the desert prison. And at Li Tianlan's age and physical condition, it was almost impossible for him to enter the invincible realm. In Li Guangtu's view, such a game would not have a relatively clear result until after next year's election at the earliest. In other words, he had at least a year to keep a low profile and recuperate. It was difficult for him to be sure that he would recover in a year, but he had his advantages. The longevity seal and the immortal seal were enough to make his state better in the next year and further get rid of Lin Fengting, who was also recovering. At that time, he would undoubtedly have more confidence. Even if there were any accidents in the middle, the time of the game would be further extended. Li Guangtu had already begun to think of ways to intervene in the internal game of Jianghu State, intending to create some chaos. But he never thought that Chen Fengqing would be so stupid as to start a bullshit termination plan. The most ridiculous thing was that the plan was completely exposed not long after it started. Li Guangtu, who was not mentally prepared, was completely dumbfounded as he watched all of this develop rapidly. Before anyone could react, the academics had successfully withdrawn, and Chen Fengqing, who was in control of the game, directly began his most intense means. He no longer paid attention to the so-called balance, nor did he care about the impact in the future. Therefore, because of the withdrawal of the academics, Chen Fengqing, who had no choice, blocked the desert prison in an extremely radical way. The game had become a real war. There was no doubt that Chen Fengqing lost. He might not be a complete failure now. But Li Tianlan always came out of the desert prison, and the shocking sword over the desert meant that the giant group and the southeast group had achieved a stage victory in this war. Haoyue group had an accident. Special warfare group had an accident. All this was Li Tianlan and Wang Xianxiao's counterattack. The subsequent development was almost not difficult to guess. Li Guangtu couldn't understand why Chen Fengqing was so stupid. Maybe he was not stupid, but from the moment the termination plan was exposed, he had no choice. The termination plan was not a mistake. The only mistake was that it was exposed. Li Guangtu didn't bother to think about the inside story. The reality was in front of him. He had wanted to wait a little longer. But Li Tianlan's strength was beyond his expectation. According to Li Tianlan's current growth rate, in less than 3 years, even if he recovered from his injury, he might not be able to defeat Li Tianlan. Not to mention 3 years later, even now, Li Tianlan had Shenyuan Feng in his hand. In the case that Shenyuan Feng had sufficient energy, he was not sure that he could win. This was a terrible thing. For Li Guangtu, this was even the most terrible thing. The most terrible thing. Once he couldn't defeat Li Tianlan or was suppressed by Li Tianlan, he could imagine what would happen to him. Everything that belonged to him would be taken away by Li Tianlan. Because they were all from the Li family. For many people in the purgatory of Heaven capital, their sense of belonging was actually the same. There were not many people who were loyal to Li Tianlan. There were also not many people who were loyal to Li Guangtu. Most people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital had a sense of belonging to the Li family. Once he was left behind by Li Tianlan, with his infinite future possibilities, he could almost make Li Guangtu lose everything in the shortest time. So Li Guangtu didn't want to wait, and he didn't dare to wait. He had planned to wait a few more years. When Emperor Dong's palace completely swallowed up Shenyuan city and when everything in Emperor Dong's palace was completed, as long as he killed Li Tianlan, he could take over everything left by Li Tianlan in the shortest time and become the new Emperor Dong. This meant that he could get a whole city, a city built with a lot of money that he didn't even dare to imagine. If the Purgatory of Heaven capital got the complete Emperor Dong's palace in Shenyuan city, it was almost equivalent to getting the whole Tiannan. The Purgatory of Heaven capital would become the most terrifying force in the dark world. But Li Tianlan's speed of growth made him dare not delay at all. Under the sun, Li Guangtu stood on the edge of the construction site, muttered something to himself silently, and then shook his head. He stood there and waited for a minute. A pitch-black Passat slowly drove over. If it was in Tiannan 2 years ago, it could be said to be an absolute luxury car. But in the current Shenyuan city, it was a completely inconspicuous ordinary car. Li Guangtu sat in the car, rubbed his forehead, and let out a long sigh. How's Moon God? The driver was Daybreak, another invincible realm expert of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. His injury had completely recovered, but he hadn't stabilized his realm for the time being. His powerful aura was constantly fluctuating. Not good, Li Guangtu whispered. Very not good. His voice was a little depressed. Daybreak was silent for a while, started the car and whispered, "It's not necessarily hopeless. I've heard of Silver Eyes in Beihai. She can be regarded as an authoritative figure in this field. Now the cooperation between Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace is at a critical period. Even if it's to please Li Tianlan, the Wang family of Beihai will inevitably work harder to let Silver Eyes save Moon God. It's a good thing to let her stay here for the time being. She's too slow. Maybe I should talk to the Wang family of Beihai, of course, after the final battle." Li Guangtu narrowed his eyes. After the final battle, he would kill Li Tianlan and annex Emperor Dong's palace before Jianghu state reacted. And after the final battle, if Li Tianlan died, the current situation in Jianghu state would be different again. Daybreak was silent for a while and didn't speak. "How's Dawn doing in East Island?" Li Guangtu suddenly asked. "Everything is going well." Daybreak nodded. "My Shiranui is very cooperative. At present, Dawn has regained control of Liuhua Palace. In Heaven capital, our pawns have been activated. At present, we can be sure that in order to recapture the south of Beihai province, East Island will invest a considerable part of its power in this final battle. Their interior will inevitably be empty. With the cooperation of Liuhua Palace, we can get back part of the power of East Island." Liuhua Palace was a name that had been dim in the dark world for several years. It was also a martial arts force that was as famous as Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School a few years ago. Shinichi Miyamoto, the palace master of Liuhua Palace, was also recognized as the peak ninja in the whole dark world. He controlled the most elite divine wind force in East Island. In terms of actual power, he was no less than Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kurasumi. But in the final battle of Heaven capital 5 years ago, Shinichi Miyamoto of the Invincible Realm died in the hands of Tribulation. Therefore, Tribulation broke through and directly entered the Invincible Realm from the Qi-controlling realm. But Liuhua Palace never recovered. After the Purgatory of Heaven capital entered East Island, Mai Shiranui, the young palace master, was the first to seek refuge with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The sphere of influence of Liuhua Palace was maintained under the protection of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. As the Purgatory of Heaven capital gradually withdrew from East Island in the past 2 years, Liuhua Palace was annexed by the other 2 martial arts forces all the time. Now there was a chance to establish contact with the Purgatory of Heaven capital again. Mai Shiranui, who had no way out, had no chance to refuse. When the final battle takes place, go to East Island and kill all the Tom, Dick, and Harry. I'll see the result of the final battle and consider whether to talk to the Mikado of East Island." Li Guangtu gently raised the corner of his mouth, and his smile was a little mocking. Daybreak was now an invincible realm superior. Together with Dawn and Phoenix, he would come to East Island with the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. When East Island put most of its power into the final battle, They could sweep everything. After the final battle, in the worst case, the Purgatory of Heaven capital could regain control of East Island. The best case was to control the Jianghu state and the dark world of East Island, unify Tiannan, conquer the underground world of Southeast Asia, and establish a real dynasty. Li Guangtu looked out of the window. His eyes were extremely bright, like two wildfires burning. Daybreak hesitated and said softly, "East Island won't be a big problem. I can go to Beihai with you." Li Guangtu was silent for a while, then slowly shook his head and said, "It's not necessary." He was confident enough in his strength. God! Li Tianlan may not be able to take him down with Shen Yuan Feng. Daybreak said calmly. Li Guangtu laughed. "I'm not fighting with him alone. Shen Yuan Feng is really strong, but it's just a murderous weapon in essence. Its energy will be exhausted. After all, in the final battle, he will face more than one invincible realm expert. When Shen Yuan Feng's energy is almost exhausted, I will make a move, and it will be enough to decide his life or death in an instant." Daybreak was silent for a while and held the steering wheel tightly. He glanced at Li Guangtu through the rearview mirror, hesitated and said softly, "Your Highness." Li Guangtu glanced at him. "How much strength has he recovered now?" Daybreak asked softly. This was something that every high-level official in the Purgatory of Heaven capital was very concerned about. Everyone knew that Li Guangtu recovered very fast in secret, and he was in a good state. This was also an important source of confidence for them to plot against East Island again. But no one knew how much Li Guangtu had recovered. Li Guangtu was silent for a while and said calmly, "In the normal state, I've recovered about 70%, which is about the same as my heyday before I went to Eastern Europe." Daybreak's eyes lit up. He went to the heyday of Eastern Europe. At that time, Li Guangtu was a god, with a strength that could break through the peak of the invincible realm at any time. This was Li Guangtu's normal state now. Li Guangtu smiled and continued to say, "If necessary, I can exert about 90% of my strength in a short time, which is enough to deal with any situation." Li Guangtu's 90% strength now. This was not his peak state now. But it had definitely surpassed the limit of the peak of the invincible realm. Daybreak was silent for a while and laughed. "Then I'll go back to East Island." He was talking about going back to East Island. Not going there. He was going back to the territory that used to belong to him. Li Guangtu nodded and whispered, "We'll get back everything we lost." Chapter 903. When he walked out of the train station of Shenyuan City, Yuan Lin even thought that he had come to the wrong place. In his initial impression, Shenyuan City should have been a small city belonging to Annan State. After it was split, it became one of the cities belonging to Tiannan State. Tiannan had always been in a state of chaos, with undercurrents surging. It had never been peaceful. This small city, originally called Tunnan, was full of destruction, crime, violence, and barbarism. The population here was getting smaller and smaller, and the city was getting more and more dilapidated. Every street and every road in the urban area should be full of decay and depression. This was the Tunnan city in Yuan Lin's impression. After Tunnan City became Shenyuan City, Jianghu State, Emperor Dong's palace, and many wealthy families and investment institutions in Jianghu State invested a lot of money here. In various reports, the new Shenyuan City was changing rapidly. Yuan Lin had read many reports submitted to the cabinet. In his impression, the so-called rapid change should just barely get rid of the previous appearance of Tunnan City. At most, it should be a little better than Tunnan City. It should be almost the same as a county in the inland of Jianghu State. At most, it should be a relatively well-developed county. After all, how could a small city with a very poor foundation develop so fast in 2 years? But the moment he walked out of the station, the scenes in front of him suddenly made him a little absent-minded. There were indeed no high-rise buildings like those in Huiting, Yuzhou, in Shenyuan City. The buildings here were relatively low, but absolutely did not feel the slightest sense of dilapidation. New. They were all obviously newly built buildings. Every building had a different style, and they were arranged neatly. There was an exaggerated distance between the buildings, but they were not empty. They were all filled with lawns and gardens, and in the middle of the lawns and gardens, there were clean and tidy paths paved with stone slabs, quiet and tidy. Between the buildings on both sides were wide and somewhat incredible streets. The smooth streets stretched all the way to the end of the site. Perhaps it was because the south was relatively warm. Even in winter, flowers were still blooming on the green belt that isolated the sidewalks and driveways. Under the bright sun, the fresh air with almost no industrial pollution blew over. Both the vehicles and the pedestrians in sight were indescribably leisurely. No, it was not leisurely. Yuan Lin was stunned for a long time before he realized the problem. As the first deputy director of the cabinet office and the chief secretary of the prime minister, he spent most of his time in Yuzhou or inspecting various places in Jianghu state with Chen Fengqing. He traveled to many places. However, he had never seen a city like Shenyuan City. The biggest difference was the population density. There were very few people in Shenyuan City. It was so little that it was hard to believe. There was no heavy traffic, no dense flow of people. The wide streets, the beautiful city, the fresh air, and the almost cold population made everything in the city look very leisurely. It was an indescribable feeling of comfort. Is this really Tiannan? Tiannan Shenyuan City? Yuan Lin was dumbfounded. He walked out of the station in a daze and walked forward in a daze. Only when the person in charge of receiving him greeted him did he manage to regain his senses. Hello, Director Yuan. I'm Xiao Su from the police department. At the exit, a tall and straight young man wearing gold-rimmed glasses smiled warmly and respectfully reached out his hands to shake hands with Yuan Lin. Yuan Lin came back to his senses and took a deep breath. His tone was inexplicably low. Let's go. Xiao Su nodded and took the luggage from Yuan Lin's hands. She said softly, "The car is in the underground car park." Yuan Lin grunted in acknowledgement and followed little Su down the elevator. The underground car park was also huge and clean with soft lights. There were not many cars parked inside, but it made Yuan Lin a little dazed again. As far as the eye could see, the sparse cars parked in various positions were basically all less than 300,000 yuan. 300,000 yuan was considered a small amount, and there were no less than 500,000 yuan. Yuan Lin looked at the Hyundai in front of Xiao Su. No matter how he looked at it, it felt shabby. This was Shenyuan City. This was Shenyuan City? Yuan Lin blinked his eyes. Everything was like a dream. He sat in the back of the car in silence. The sense of superiority in his heart had disappeared without a trace. The black Hyundai slowly left the car park, out of the station, and drove into the wide streets of Shenyuan City. Yuan Lin quietly looked at everything outside the window. Exquisite buildings, huge spacing, and sufficient greenery. The willfulness of Shenyuan City could be seen everywhere. No country could make such an extravagant urban planning. This was almost not a city, but a luxurious and exquisite huge garden. With such an exaggerated design style, how many people could this city accommodate after it was built? He had seen the urban planning submitted by the Shenyuan City Hall in the cabinet. The new Shenyuan City was about 6,500 square kilometers. Such a city area was not large. Compared with Yuzhou, which was 17,000 square kilometers, the area of Shenyuan City was only a little more than one-third of Yuzhou. But Yuzhou had a population of more than 20 million. What about Shenyuan City? Yuan Lin was not an expert in this area. He could only make a rough judgment. Such a city plan could accommodate at most hundreds of thousands of people. Using more than one-third of Yuzhou to accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. And it was not hundreds of thousands of people. 300,000 yuan. 400,000 yuan? What did it mean? Yuan Lin took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "The development of Shenyuan City is really good." Yes, that's for sure. Only 1/5 of Shenyuan City has been completed. There are 5 districts in Shenyuan City, which are named simply North, South, East, West, and the city center. Now, most of the places in the city have basically been demolished. Working day and night, the entire Shenyuan City is basically a construction site. We are now in the North District, where the construction has just started. However, the reconstruction of the city center has been completed. Only after going there and taking a look will you know how exaggerated it is. If this goes on, when Shenyuan City is completed, the entire city can almost be said to be a luxury. Hearing this, Xiao Su smiled and said, "But that's the future, Yuan Hall. Everything that you can see now is equivalent to 1/5 of Shenyuan City." Only after a while, Yuan Lin whispered to himself, Where does the money come from? That's what our team leader wants to know. Little Su shrugged. Yuan Lin did not speak anymore. He seemed to be trying to figure out the source of the money of Emperor Dong's palace. He was Chen Fengqing's secretary. Chen Fengqing was the prime minister, and the main person in charge of the financial department of Jianghu state must be his confidant. Jianghu state still attached great importance to the construction of Xianyuan city. In the past 2 years, there had been 3 appropriations, totaling nearly 40 billion yuan. But this number was obviously not enough to build a city with almost nothing. Judging from the current situation, it was not nothing at all, but Emperor Dong's palace didn't want anything at all, and even spent money to demolish and rebuild the original foundation. 40 billion yuan was not even enough for the most basic construction. Plus the interests of the 5 Eastern European countries, and the investment of the wealthy families. Yuan Lin did not think that Emperor Dong's palace could build such a city. A city that could be described as a luxury. The black Hyundai drove into the city center in silence. Yuan Lin watched quietly, and his heart became more and more numb. Exquisite buildings, huge statues, gorgeous streetlights, lush greenery, a grand square. The Hyundai drove all the way and finally entered a small forest. Well, a small forest in the city center. The corner of Yuan Lin's mouth twitched as if he was stimulated. The forest in the city center. He felt that the city center and the forest could not be connected at all. No matter how small this small forest was, it could be used to build at least a large residential area, a business circle, or... There were too many choices. But Emperor Dong's palace willfully built here. Or rather, preserved a forest. All the buildings around seemed to adapt to the style of this forest, and it did not look out of place as a whole. Yuan Lin raised his head stiffly. The road in front of him slowly went up along a not obvious slope. At the highest point at the end of his sight was a pure white building like a castle. In a verdant forest, the castle was looming, with an indescribable pure beauty. The corner of Yuan Lin's mouth twitched. He wanted to say something, but he swallowed it back. He had made up his mind to complain about Emperor Dong's palace when he returned to Yuzhou. This city was luxurious and beautiful beyond Yuan Lin's imagination. But all of this meant nothing in his eyes. This was completely the capriciousness of the rich. To be exact, it was a reckless waste of resources. Hyundai kept going up. The pure white castle in front of him was getting closer and closer. Yuan Lin opened his mouth little by little. He watched the castle getting higher and higher. The soft sound faintly echoed in the forest. His eyes widened. He was dumbfounded. He was really dumbfounded. This forest might be a hill preserved by Emperor Dong's palace. But the problem was that this pure white castle was not on the top of the mountain at all. It was a huge, exquisite, and luxurious castle. A castle floating in the air. It was really a castle in the air. It floated about 20 or 30 meters high in the air, gently rotating at an imperceptible speed. The doorman trotted over and opened the door respectfully. Yuan Lin got out of the car and looked up, dumbfounded. From his point of view, he could see the huge base of the floating castle. The pure white base was engraved with countless patterns, forming a pattern of a clock. It was dusk, and night was approaching. The base of the castle was shining with gorgeous light, illuminating the whole top of the mountain dreamily. What was this? What the hell was this? This. Damn it. What was this? City in the Sky, the most high-end club in Tiannan. Su's tone was a little complicated. This is an industry belonging to Emperor Dong's palace, and Xianyuan City is the first one. According to their plan, in the next 1 or 2 years, branches of City in the Sky will be established in every first-tier and second-tier city in Jianghu state. The initial plan is to establish more than 50 similar clubs. Yuan Lin swallowed hard and murmured, "How did they do it? The power of money and privilege." Little Su chuckled. Yuan Lin watched this scene quietly. In a daze, he did not notice a black Passat slowly parking in the parking space near him. The doorman nearby wanted to run over and open the door. In the driver's seat, Daybreak waved his hand. He turned off the car, but did not get out. Instead, he looked at Yuan Lin not far away. The chief secretary of the cabinet? Daybreak raised his eyebrows and laughed. Why does he look like a bumpkin? Is he scared out of his wits? No, he doesn't know how to get up, does he? Does he want to fly up there? He must want to fly up. When did you become so mean? Li Kuangtu glanced at him with a smile. Daybreak laughed and asked, "Your Highness, are you here to see him today?" Li Kuangtu leaned against the back of the chair and narrowed his eyes. "Maybe, but he's not the one who asked me out." You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.